Gentlemen, and welcome to the the April 9 edition of your City Council and Redevelopment Agency meeting. Would you please rise for the Pledge of Allegiance?
To the flag of the United States of America, to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Next item on the agenda are changes to the order of agenda. Are there any changes from the council? Staff? The agenda stands as written. Item 3, council communications and announcements. I'd like to start by considering a request from staff that we have a special council meeting during the week of May 7 to review our fiscal year 2007-2008 operating budget. This will be a good week for staff as they prepare to develop that final budget. So take a look at your calendars a moment and see if there is an evening that works best. Week of May 6. May 7 would be Monday. Tuesday's the Pell dinner. That's not going to work. Wednesday, Thursday. Any preference? What time do you think, Mark?
We were thinking in the neighborhood of 6 to 7 as a start time, 2 hours. So, I mean, 7 o'clock would be fine if that works for you.
7 o'clock? 7 o'clock Monday?
Monday or Thursday?
Monday or Thursday. We're honing in on Monday or Thursday.
Monday sounds
Monday looks good?
Yeah.
Monday looks good. Monday looks good here. We got Monday. It's an auction. We got Monday, 7 p.m. here in City Hall.
No, May 7th.
And that's a budget.
Sorry?
Budget is the
Budget, yes. Mm-hmm. All right. Now, let's go to reports. Anything to report from council? Matt?
Nothing here.
Bob?
Nothing.
And Brad?
I have a couple of quick things. One was I serve as a liaison of Peninsula Traffic Congestion Relief Alliance, and I got a notice in the paper that some might be interested in, and it relates to an event surrounding Earth Day. It's an event at the San Mateo Caltrain Station on Tuesday, April 17th between 4 and 6 p.m. And what they're trying to emphasize for Earth Day that week is the week of April 16th is to try to reduce your carbon footprint by riding Caltrain, Samtrans, BART, carpool, walk, or bike that week. And just to try that out a couple of those days and see how that affects your commute and whether or not you can integrate that into your foundation of the way that you travel on a weekly basis. So I thought that April 17th between 4 and 6, they're going to be giving away some prizes and so forth at the Caltrain station. And I've got a flyer on that. We can make that available to everybody.
Excuse me, that's the Caltrain station in San Mateo?
Yes, it is. Okay, thank you. And there's also more information on www.commute.org. And then the other thing was I and Mayor Davids and Councilmember Grisili were all in attendance at the San Carlos Educational Foundation Spring Fling, which was a big, successful fundraising event. It's their primary event for the spring. And we had a lot of fun. Councilmember Grisili spent a little bit of money. And I was able to guest auctioneer for the night, and Tom was walking around. I didn't see him putting his name on too many things, but we'll.
I tried. The big hitters were out there.
So, at any rate, it was a great event and run every spring and well run by the Ed Foundation.
Thank you. I'd like to let the audience and the folks at home know that we have now a receptacle for pharmaceuticals. Or medical, I guess we should call this, your prescription drugs and so forth that you no longer need and don't know what to do with. Now, we don't want you to flush them down the toilet. We don't want you to put them in the garbage. We want you to bring them to the Belmont Police Department in their city hall, number 2 Twin Pines Lane, and put them in their little white box. It's right inside the lobby, and they're open during normal business hours, Monday through Friday. And by doing so, you'll save the environment a lot of pain and suffering by getting rid of this in a logical way. What they do is, and they're working in conjunction with our police department, they take them down periodically to the county building, and there's a means down there to take them to a place where they're incinerated. So I urge you to do that. And also on the recycling, I just remind you again that we do have a battery and cell phone recycling collection system in place. If you'll take your batteries, your alkaline batteries, your lithium batteries, not your car batteries, but those flashlight batteries you may or may not know what to do with, put them in a Ziploc bag, put them on top of your newspapers for recycling, and they'll pick them up when they come by to pick up your recycling. So that's a great service that the folks at Allied have set up, and we'll hopefully be able to very simply get rid of these batteries that tend to hang around and create problems for us. So with that, let's move on to reports to council. The first item is a review. Well, let me first of all report that we did have a closed session prior to this meeting. We gave advice to staff. No action was taken. And now let's move along to the Flooding and Land Use Creeks Committee.
Mayor and members of council, this is the third quarterly report on the Flooding, Land Use, and Creeks Ad Hoc Committee, also known as the FLUC. As you know, this was set up by the council last June. It has a one-year term from July of 2006 to June of 2007. The group is tasked over a one-year period to look at issues such as creek setbacks, solving the city's flooding problem, interagency efforts towards creek regulation and sedimentation. You've seen this report before on page 2. It has highlights of each quarter. The relevant highlights for this particular report are the group discussed their experiences with Fish and Game Department regulations. They had a presentation by a gentleman from Fish and Game. They discussed a draft letter to the City Council regarding some of their recommendations, which is attached in your packet tonight as Attachment C of this item. And they also began work on a proposed meeting with Creekside property owners to be held in May, and that would require a $300 expenditure from the City Council budget. In terms of what's coming up in their fourth and final quarter between April and June, the members of the ad hoc group plan to hold the meeting in May. They plan to discuss the activities of the Mayor's Creek and Natural Resources Group. They plan to meet in June with the Community Development Director, Al Savay, and the General Plan Consultant, which we believe by June will be in place, and also members of the Natural Resources Task Force to identify key aspects of the environmental management element of the future general plan. And finally, they plan to work with staff on the final FLUC report, which will be presented to you in July. I also wanted to mention to you that in addition to Attachment C, which is the letter from the FLUC members to Council, there's also Attachment B, which are a series of 10 items which the committee members are thinking of including in their meeting with the public in May. Their vision is this would be a 2-hour meeting from 7 to 9 p.m. on the 25th. I think they recognize that they probably couldn't cover all 10 of those items in a 2-hour session, but they have delegated to Chairman Len Matterman and Secretary Dick Edminster the task of coming up with 2 or 3 of those items as the topic matter on May 25th. I also wanted to mention to you that Waleed Naja, who's the vice chair of the FLUC, and also Claire Kelly is a committee member, are here in the audience tonight, and as you discuss or have any questions on this item, you may also want to hear comments from the two of them.
Thank you, Brian. Any questions for Brian?
I have
Go ahead.
just one, the $300 that's requested.
Yes.
We carry some kind of budget every year in the council budget, so there's no issue there with taking $300 out of our budget.
No, I think we just wanted to disclose to the Councilmember Grocott, that we were going to expense it out of your budget. As you know, when you formed the committee, it had no budget attached to it, so that I thought was that probably the most efficient way to do this.
Very good. Okay, thank you.
I do have one question, Brian, regarding item 2 and item 8 on the list. It talks about what orders can do and what is allowed and not allowed. Are these rules by the city, the state, the federal?
I think conceptually what the committee was talking about was talking to the creek owners, or informing them, if you will, about what the process might be if they wanted to modify their property or to install features, sort of an informational process. There was also some discussion at the first meeting that the group had last July of perhaps even producing a brochure in consultation with Mr. Save's department, sort of a pamphlet, if you will, on how you apply for creek permitting. So that might be something that could be covered in that May 25th meeting.
Okay, thank you. Yes.
The only other thing I'd point out is there are a couple, I realize it's hard to cover 10 topics in a night. There do seem to be some of these that are a little bit more specific to homeowners on a creekside level, and there's some that are less, perhaps immediate, or it may be a step-by-step process.
Right.
But there's a couple of these that are not even perhaps big topics. So it may be that you can get to a few more of these things.
Yeah, and I think, in fairness to the group, these 10 kind of came up during sort of a brainstorming session at their last meeting, so I think everybody just kind of put things on the table, and that was at the end of their discussion. They delegated to Mr. Matterman and Mr. Edminster the task of kind of bringing it down to 2 or 3. It is their intent, as I understand it, that at their April meeting on the 18th of this month, that they would have further discussion in terms of maybe tightening up that list a little bit.
Great, because it does seem like you could condense this into 2 or 3 talking, areas to discuss, and might be able to get through perhaps all of them.
Okay. Questions? Anything else? Members of the committee like to speak to this, or are we okay?
We're okay.
Very good. Thank you, and thank you for your good work. We look forward to another good quarter and the final report coming up. Next item on the agenda is a report on various service level options for the Fire Joint Powers Agreement, associated cost funding options, and phase-in expense plan if adopted. And City Manager Mice.
Mr. Mayor, members of the City Council, this item is before you as one of the objectives within the strategic work plan. We pledged to bring forward a multi-year plan for fire services. As you know, the city has been working diligently with the City of Belmont, the Fire District in Belmont, to put the JPA back in order, and that is on the agenda later this evening. This item, though, is just a report to you with respect to the aspirations of the fire department with respect to future services within the fire department. We've pointed out, I think, in this report and in the report that follows, the fiscal implications to the city. To the degree that we're in a static revenue situation, enhancements in any one area require reductions in another area, as long as that revenue situation is in that static mode. But with that, I would introduce Chief Fry to talk with you with regard to his report regarding the future services of the fire department.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Just one thing, too, in regards to your the drop for Belmont. We're also doing a drop program for sharps for needles that are used by the community for, self-shots for diabetes or anything like that. Will be at Fire Station 9, will be a drop-off point there in Redwood City. They're going to do 3 spots in the county, so I'll be sure to get you that information.
We'll have more information on that.
More information on that forthcoming, but we're all working in concert on trying to get those things taken care of.
Very
because
good.
they tend to show up at one location, and then we
call those sharps, is that it?
That's what they call the needles or sticks is what they call them, the sharps.
Okay.
What I did was I just did a quick little PowerPoint as just where we were the last few years and kind of what the direction we'd like to see the department go to in the future. And so I want to talk a little bit about the response statistics.
Excuse me, Chief, can we turn the lights down so that folks can see that? Thank you.
Response statistics, current response configurations that we have within the agency, what an engine company does, what a truck company does. There's 2 completely different pieces of equipment that we have. And talk about our staffing configuration, past, present, and what we would like to do in the future with some staffing configurations, and then the potential of down the road of looking at grants to help us with our staffing. But those have a close date on those to where the federal government funds that significantly in the front, and over a period of years it gets to the point where the agency needs to fund it 100%. But it does give us some relief for 4 or 5 years to deal with issues as we look at funding. And then questions that we may have. So I'm going to talk about last year, how busy we were. We went on a total of 4,302 total incidents in 2006. 6,466 of those were individual responses, which means out of every single station, maybe 1, maybe 2 pieces of equipment, 3 pieces may have gone, but total out of all the stations, 6,466 times we rolled equipment out of our fire stations. The battalion chief rolled 834 times. Truck 13 had 1,445 responses. We had Truck 14 in service for a few months at Fire Station 14. They had 139 responses. During that time, we had Engine 13 back up. They had 180 responses. Engine 14 had 1,600 responses. There was a couple of days that they were not paramedic engine company. They had 44 responses during that time. Engine 15, again, 1,223 responses, 42 of which when they were not, did not have a paramedic on board. And Engine 16 in San Carlos had 683 responses. 261 of those were when they did not have a paramedic on board. We have since this time, this was early in the year, our staffing was low. Mid-year, we were able to do the hiring that we discussed, and we've been able to bring fire medics back up on every piece of equipment. We've had no down days during the last 6 months, the last half of this last year. How do we compare to other agencies in the county? We're the 6th busiest of 17 jurisdictions in this county. Battalion 4 is the 3rd busiest of 28 different battalion chiefs in the county. The truck is the 2nd busiest of 20 stations. Engine 14th is the 9th busiest out of 70 total pieces of equipment. Engine 15 is 19, and Engine 16 is the 32nd busiest. But you can see we have a couple of busy stations in the top 10 that have a lot of activity just in this part in our jurisdiction, what we cover. Our emergency configuration and response, how do we respond for calls for assistance? One of them is medical aid. Right now, that's almost 50% of our responses is medical aid responses. The system that we have in place calls for the closest fire apparatus to respond to that location with at least 1 paramedic on it. And then they do the treatment, and we have a contract with the county that says we need to be there within 6 minutes, 59 seconds. The private ambulance, which is provided through AMR, through the county, has an 11-minute, 59-second response time for them to arrive on the scene. There's 2 agencies in the county currently that provide ambulance service through AMR, where they have an ambulance in their own jurisdiction. Because of AMR cannot meet that response time, well, that area is Woodside, and the other one is Pacifica. The rest of it, we fall into the system that has this in place. Another type of response is vehicle accidents. We send an engine, a truck company, a battalion chief, and the reason we send those equipment is, again, for the paramedic treatment component, and our truck carries all of the rescue tools that we carry to extricate or deal with securing a vehicle. Again, the engine's assigned to the treatment of the injured citizens and also does the firefighting capabilities, and the truck is assigned to extrication, scene safety, and assist with patient treatment. And then the battalion chief falls into play as a safety officer and watches over the incident. We also have a full assignment response, which is anything other than a structure fire, where somebody smells smoke, they have something happening, an electrical issue in their house. We send what we call a full assignment response, and that is 1 battalion chief, 3 fire engines, and 1 truck company. That's the standard in the county. That's what every single agency has agreed to. And again, this falls under the closest unit response. The closest unit, if they're going to drill, if they're wherever they may be, the system is looking for the closest unit. We had a fire a couple of months ago in Foster City, right at Hillsdale and 101. We happen to have a significant drill going on at our Fire Station 14 right at Ralston, and the first in companies of that fire were from Woodside, Redwood City, and from our agency, because just of where they were within the system. They were closer to that incident than other closer pieces of equipment may have been. And then we have the structure fire response, our initial dispatch, and this is primarily because we've looked over the years at issues that have happened throughout the country where firefighters have been trapped. We need additional overhead to make sure that we manage the scene safely. We now send 2 battalion chiefs, 4 fire engines, 1 fire engine for a RIC, which is a rapid intervention crew, which is a standby crew in case someone gets lost inside of a structure, and then 1 truck company that handles ventilation work or does the outside activities that's needed for a structure fire. Each additional alarm gets you 3 additional fire engines, 1 truck, and 1 more battalion chief. So as you keep adding, there's a consistency that goes down the road through this response. And again, this was done from the border of Menlo Park all the way to the San Francisco border. Every single response is the same. Depending upon where the companies will be, we have that type of response in place. So you could very easily get multiple calls going on here. From time to time, you'll see county fire equipment here. Redwood City Fire will be here. Foster City Fire is here. We do drills throughout the zone, what we call the South Zone, which is from Belmont all the way to Menlo Park and Woodside. And we have multiple pieces of equipment in all of our stations for training. So it's very easy for a Woodside fire engine to be taking a call in our jurisdiction if our guys are not available to go on that response. Again, the fire engine carries personnel to emergencies. It is equipped with a 1,500 gallon per minute pump and carries 500 gallons of water. It has one 24-foot extension ladder and one 14-foot extension ladder. Primarily carries fire hose, carries all the medical equipment and things that were needed to deal with the firefighting piece of what we do day to day. Carries 1,000 feet of 5-inch hose, 800 feet of 2.5-inch hose, 200 feet of what we call 1 3/4 attack line, 400 feet of a utility line, and then we have high-rise packs and support equipment, 1.5-inch hose that we carry for high-rise types of fires, Davy Glen, anything that we're going to be climbing stairs and going up to, we have different hoses to deal with that. And again, this is a standard throughout the county. Every single fire engine carries this same complement of equipment on their apparatus. They also carry all the medical equipment for paramedic response, so they carry a monitor, defibrillator, drug box, airway box, trauma bags, and the paramedic and equipment makes fire crews capable as an ambulance, short of having the transport piece, which is what AMR comes in and deals with that component. Some of the roles of capabilities of the fire engine is to extinguish fires, structure fires, vehicle fires, grass fires, however that falls into play, searches for victims during emergency operations, protect surrounding exposures from the spread of fire, conduct salvage operations to save contents inside the structure, provide medical treatment to sick and injured, and our ladders can reach only to the 2nd story, roughly 16 to 18 feet, with the ground ladders that we carry on the engine company. So some of our buildings in the industrial area, our ground ladders that we carry on the fire apparatus do not reach those roofs to get into those. And we have the truck company that carries those other pieces for that. Truck 13 is a tillered apparatus, driver in the back, driver in the front. It can go just about anywhere a fire engine can go because of the maneuverability. The other truck that we have is a straight truck, and we are certainly limited by access to some streets because it doesn't have the turning radius that the tiller truck does have. This truck is at Fire Station 13. We have had a truck at Station 13 since the South County days in 1979 when we first merged, and the reason for that was San Carlos had the only fire station that would fit in. When we closed the stations and did some things, the only station that would fit in was Fire Station 13, and so for the last 27 plus years, we have run a truck out of that fire station. Of course, for a number of years, we ran an engine also out of that station. Truck has no water, has no capabilities to fight fire. It carries specialized tools and equipment essential for safe and effective emergency operations. Carries the tools to allow us to have the capability to respond to a variety of calls for assistance. It is a toolbox on wheels. It carries just about everything that we need to deal with emergency operations for auto extrication and scene safety. It carries all the equipment, cribbing, rescue tools, jaws of life, rams, pulleys, the whole works it carries on the truck. Stabilizes vehicles and equipment to allow for firefighter safety and security of the vehicles. Here's an example of some of the equipment with all of the rescue. We have 2 sets of Jaws of Life, one that can be portable if we need to get into a canyon or off the beaten path a little bit. We have a portable one that we can take in with the equipment, and then we have one that's fixed in the vehicle that we just turn on a switch that's electric, and we can, go 100 feet or so from the vehicle and deal with what we need to do with there. Again, for structure, firefighting, ventilation purposes, it cuts holes in the roof to allow for smoke and hot gases to be removed, greatly reduces the heat and smoke trapped within the structure, allows the engine company and the crews to get inside the building and penetrate to the seat of the fire and do what they need to do. But when the crews go in and there's lots of smoke, it takes them a much more difficult time to get to where they need to go. By getting a truck on the roof, opening it up, it allows the crews to get in there quickly and be more efficient. And then the survivability of occupants is improved as environmental conditions improve. We carry smoke blowers, gas-operated smoke blowers that we set up. We, in essence, create a chimney type of operation within the house. We'll close all the windows inside of a house, open up the roof, open up the ceiling, put a blower at the front door, and it will force the smoke right out that opening, just like a chimney does in a fireplace. So there's operations that fall into play. Again, these fall on, are carried on the truck company as a support to the existing, to complement the crews that are doing the firefighting activities. That's a 100-foot ladder. The ladder that's carried on the top is hydraulically operated. It has a pre-plumb waterway that can be set at 100 feet high or 75 feet high. We also carry a 40-foot ground ladder, a 35-foot extension ladder, 28-foot extension ladder, both of which those from 28 on up is what we would use in the industrial area to get access to those roofs, or use the 100-foot ladder. And we also carry 20-foot straight ladders, 16-foot roof ladders, and some combination ladders and some folding ladders that allow us access into attics inside of the house. Once we go into a house, we need to get in the attic, we can go in there. We also carry some specialized tools and saws, cut-off saws, metal cutting saws, concrete cutting saws. We're pretty much prepared for anything that we need to do to deal with for that type of operation. We also carry a full complement of rescue harnesses and ropes, so that if we need to rescue someone off the roof or work on that, we can put a basket on the tip of the ladder and move it up 100 feet wherever we need to go and bring someone down. Staffing levels currently, we have 4 companies. We're running the truck. Well, from 1996 to 2003, we had 4 engine companies, 1 at each fire station, and a truck company at Station 13 and a battalion chief. In essence, you had 17 people, 16, 17 people on duty, 24, 365. Once we did the ballot initiative in 03 and that failed, we reduced the company out of Station 13, and we ran 3 companies, 3 engines, 1 truck, and 1 battalion chief. So in essence, we eliminated 1 company. So we went down from 16 personnel to 13 personnel on duty every day. Our future goal, of course, is to bring that company back to Station 13 because of the responses, because of the truck running out of there. That is our single piece of equipment that does pretty much all the supports the other engines, and many times that's committed already on medical calls in this jurisdiction. With Station 13 and 14 being in the top 10 as far as response, there's many back-to-back responses that occur within those 2 jurisdictions where that company could help support that, eliminate that load a little bit. A couple of things to talk about is we can maintain our current staffing configuration, keeps financial costs to the cities artificially low at low levels. The disadvantage is it continues to provide inadequate amount of resources provided to need the level of protection that I feel we need for these 2 communities. We had 4 companies and a truck for 25 plus years, and we were able to be self-sustained and be able to operate the department effectively and meet the needs of the community. It's much more difficult missing that one other company to deal with some of the issues we need to deal with every day. With hazmat response, some of the other things that fall into play, it makes it a little bit difficult. Future staffing, again, we can go back up to 4 engines, and we could contract for truck service from Redwood City or San Mateo. That cost would be about $1 million a year, based on proposals we've received from those 2 agencies, roughly $500,000 to Redwood City and $500,000 to San Mateo to cover truck response for the 2 cities. It's one of those things that we carry all the rescue equipment that's here, and we would still have to wait for that equipment to come from somewhere else. So again, it's that delayed response. And if they're already committed on calls, then it's going to be coming from a further distance. Yeah, we talked about the cost that goes along with that. And then cross-staffing is something I'd like to get to in the future at a point, is get 3 more personnel on board sometime in the next couple of years, and allow the truck and the engine to be cross-staffed at Fire Station 13, and eventually work to a point that we could get the company back completely. But at least I think cross-staffing is an option that allows us some flexibility within the system to maintain some consistencies within the agency. It's a little bit tough to haul the truck all the way up to the end of Bayview for a call at 777 Bayview. It's a long haul to take the truck up there. Again, that frees up the truck. And then, of course, restoring the 5th company, we've had that discussion, and allows us to kind of meet the needs that we have had in this community for a number of years. And then I talked about the SAFER grant briefly. I'll just talk about that. It's a staffing for adequate fire and emergency response. We are eligible for that type of a grant, and it's something that we could apply for. It's a 5-year program, provides up to $103,500 per position. That's what was granted this year. For example, the city of Fremont received just over $1 million to staff 10 positions and reopen a station in Fremont. The next grant cycle provides for $110,000 per position, and the way it works is the first year the government would cover 90% of the actual cost, then the second year 80, third year 50, fourth year 30, and then the final year you'd be on your own to deal with that. That is something that we can pursue in the future and have discussions about, but it is something I think you need to be aware of that's out there that has a possibility. Typically, you see a lot of agencies and cities that have a lot of growth, that anticipate a lot of growth, will really go after the SAFER grant because it buys them time they'll get the positions in place, knowing in a few years that there is the growth to help support that and fund it. We don't necessarily have that option here because we're pretty much built out. There's not anything new that's really big that's on the horizon that you're going to see, several thousand new houses coming in or development coming in somewhere that's going to have a huge impact. So this does have a hit. And that wraps up my brief information to you in regards to this. If you have any questions, I'd be happy to answer.
Thank you very much, Chief. That's very enlightening. Would it be possible to get hard copies that we can take a look at our leisure? Thank you.
Okay.
Questions for the Chief on the presentation?
I've got a couple of quick questions. I wasn't sure, number of hazmat calls? Did you have that itemized as well?
No, I did not have that on there. That's a county-wide response. We're somewhere around 50 calls a year for hazmat response in the county.
Okay. And was it, I'm sorry, Station 16, it went by a little bit fast. Was that the least number of calls?
Yes.
And what do you attribute that to?
Mostly that you're in a residential area where the other areas have businesses, they have the industry, the freeways. 16 is primarily in a neighborhood, completely in a neighborhood. We don't have for example, Station 15 has a number of apartment, senior care facilities. There's just not a lot of that in District 16's area.
But at 13, we only have a truck, is that right?
Correct.
So does the engine 16 have to cover calls that an engine would cover out of 16?
If it was a call for
13?
if it was a call for an engine company, depending upon the breakdown of the district, that's yes.
So yeah,
So for example, if you had a car fire on Laurel Street and Arroyo, Engine 16 would have to respond to that call because there's no water capability at Fire Station 13 to deal with that.
So is part of that difference because there's more truck calls than there are engine calls? In other words, I would have expected 16 to be higher because that engine for San Carlos is primarily used, at least for.
Right.
Do you know what I mean? So
Yeah.
it was just surprising to me. I sort of thought, well, 60 must be busy.
Well, remember,
Only
50
after-
or 60% of those calls are medicals, which the truck has a paramedic on them and handles all the medical calls within that district, within District 13.
So it's
And-
that difference in medical calls versus
Fire calls. Right. And, again, on the bigger fire call, you would get multiple pieces of equipment coming from other stations.
Three engines,
You
right.
just don't have that one coming out of the station that could be within that district. there's a delay in that piece.
Have there been situations where we have two calls going on at the same time? And then how is that generally handled? So all three engines from the district, let's just say it's centrically located issue in between Belmont and St. Carlos. All three engines go there. Like now,
that one?
perhaps.
Like that?
All three engines go there, and then there's another call in St. Carlos or Belmont. Then it's the closest next engines go to that one?
Correct. And what we did was we did a listing of station ordering for all the streets, every single address in town, and we went 20 stations deep within the system and picking an order that companies would respond, but due to availability, due to move up. There's, for example, once every single fire station in our jurisdiction is emptied, which happens regularly on a full alarm response or better, then I have a system in place where Redwood City or San Mateo or County Fire moves a company into one of the stations for coverage. So we at least will have a company in each city to help cover the responses for other calls. What typically happens is probably 25% of the time we get back-to-back-to-back calls. So all of a sudden, you might get a medical call, and then you'll bang a full alarm response, and then those companies are coming from further away all of a sudden.
I see. And the BC on site can choose to let an engine go if they felt that that was okay after the initial response?
Correct.
You mentioned up there that it would be $500K per jurisdiction, Redwood City and San Mateo, if we wanted to
Pay for truck service.
pay for truck service. And then the next portion of that was, I think you said cross-staffing, where there'd be, if we put if we brought an engine in, that there would be a way to cross-staff.
We need to hire 3 additional personnel.
Sure.
To do the cross-staffing piece, which would allow for the crews to go between equipment and still have a minimum.
Do we have to hire 3 personnel anyway, though, if we hire an engine?
Well,
In other words, it's still a net plus 3?
yeah, one of the things that you need that falls into play is there's an agreement with the ALS contract that every piece of equipment has a minimum of 3 people on it. So we couldn't hire just 2 and put 2 on an engine and say, okay, you're going to run all the calls, because if they get a call in another jurisdiction, there's a level of expectation that they're expecting 3 personnel to show up.
I see. So you can't, like, have a truck, got an engine, you got 3 guys, they can go on either apparatus, depending on what's it.
You could, but
needs to
you'd
go?
have delayed responses and moving equipment back and forth. By having some additional personnel, it
Right.
would make it a little bit easier.
Okay. I think that's it for me. By the way, if you folks, if you hear that buzzing, that sometimes if you have a BlackBerry or cell phone that's still on, it'll create that buzzing in the PA system. So it'd be best if you have BlackBerry to turn it off.
Thank you.
Thank you, Chief.
Other questions for Chief? Thank you very much, Chief Fry. All right, next item, number 5, is public comment. This is for folks who would like to address the council on an item which is not on the posted agenda. I have one speaker slip from Pat Bell.
Pat Bell from San Carlos. 2 things tonight. Several months ago, I talked about about having more accessible parking. What used to be handicap parking is now accessible parking. I'm not going to take any of my 2 minutes to explain why, but that's what it is. And there was support from council. I want to know what ever happened to that idea. And to also let you know that many of the gas stations in this town are very hostile to people with accessible parking placards. If I go there and want my gas pumped, I get substantial flack. And after the last verbal abuse, which included words I cannot repeat on TV, accompanied by the hand gesture to go with it, I discovered the Olympian station at Arroyo and El Camino, which is an old-fashioned service station, independently owned, nice man, just terrific service. But I'll tell you, it is tough to find in San Carlos a gas station that doesn't give me real trouble when I ask them to pump my gas. And lest you think that my lack of communication on the sidewalk issue means that everything worked out just fine, wrong. I haven't had a chance to put together a final report, but I tripped today on one of the sidewalks that was marked last summer, wasn't marked this time, isn't being repaired. So things are not just stucky on the sidewalk issue either.
Thank you, Pat. Anyone else like to address council? Seeing none, we'll move on to item 6, which is approval of the consent calendar. The consent calendar items are considered to be routine and will be enacted by one motion. There will be no specific discussion on these items unless members of the council, staff, or public request specific items to be removed for separate action, in which case they'll come up at the close of our agenda. For the council, any items to be removed? Seeing none, staff?
We have none?
Anyone from the public like to remove an item from the consent calendar? Then do we have a motion?
Mr. Mayor, I'd make a motion to approve item 6A through I, the consent calendar.
Second.
Roll call, please.
Councilmember Grisilli?
Yes.
Councilmember Lewis?
Yes.
Councilmember Grocott?
Yes.
Councilmember Teagle Doherty is absent. Mayor Davids?
Yes. Next item is item number 7. This is a public hearing, consideration of adopting an ordinance extending the interim zoning ordinance requiring a conditional use permit for all uses occupying tenant spaces of greater than 2,500 square feet within the 600 and 700 blocks of Laurel Street and the 1,100 and 1,200 blocks of San Carlos Avenue to a period of 10 months and 15 days. Mr. Savay, our Community Development Director, will speak to this.
Good evening, Honorable Mayor and members of the City Council. As noted, this is a request to adopt a 45-day interim ordinance requiring a conditional use permit for new businesses in excess of 2,500 square feet in the 600 and 700 blocks of Laurel Street and also the 1,100 and 1,200 blocks of San Carlos Avenue. And those are the areas on the screen at the midpoint of the screen in yellow. That's the 700 blocks. The darker area, the brown area there, is the 600 block, and the green area represents the 1,100 and 1,200 blocks. Consideration to extend this ordinance for 10 months and 15 days is before you this evening, and prior to the 45-day interim ordinance, which the council adopted at the last council meeting on the 26th, in the downtown, retail was permitted as in any building in downtown, and it could occupy vacant buildings without city review or discretion as to the appropriateness of the use. And just to go back, just very quickly, some background. As part of the initial discussion of the 800 block ordinance that was before you a few weeks ago, extending that urgency ordinance also, there was discussion by the council of extending the urgency ordinance from the 800 block down to the 600 and 700 blocks. And also there is some concern that the areas in the 1,100 and 1,200 blocks are areas also of critical concern because they're in the downtown retail core. And so these were added to the interim urgency ordinance. There are potential vacancies of significant buildings within the downtown retail core in these areas, and therefore potential exists for a clearance-style discount retailer to enter some of those buildings or other significant buildings as demonstrated in their interest in the San Carlos marketplace. And so there is a real threat to the retail enhancement, downtown character, and economic development opportunities in these blocks. And with that, staff is recommending that the council adopt a 10-month, 15-day interim ordinance requiring a conditional use permit for all new uses occupying tenant spaces of greater than 2,500 square feet within the 600 and 700 blocks of Laurel Street and also the 1,100 and 1,200 blocks of San Carlos Avenue. And that concludes the staff report. I'm available to answer any questions.
Questions for all?
Yes, I have.
Yes,
just a couple. Since we've looked at this a number of times, and I wish I had thought of this before, but I wanted to find out so that perhaps it's something that we might want to discuss as a council on the policies. When someone would have to come in for a conditional use permit, what might that add to their whole application process in terms of time to go through the construct of that process? And the second question is, what might it mean in terms of additional fees that an applicant might need to pay? And currently, with the changeover of a tenancy, would not have to pay at all because they wouldn't be going through this process.
Well, the process is that somebody would need to apply to the Planning Division for a conditional use permit application, and the Planning Commission is required to act on the conditional use permit 45 days after the application. So essentially there's 45 days that would be added there, and there would need to be some decision made by the Planning Commission within 45 days of the application. In terms of the fee for that, I don't know the exact number, but I believe it's in excess of $2,000, but below $3,000, maybe in the $2,500, $2,700 range for fees. And currently, there are no fees and no application costs. There weren't any prior to the 45-day interim ordinance.
Can you repeat that last part? There were no fees for the...
Right. There were, if a retailer wanted to go into a building in downtown, there were no city fees whatsoever. They could just enter the building.
And with the 45 days, the Planning Commission has 45 days, you said, to act. Now, I suppose there might be some days up front of that time period in addition. And would there be, once they've acted, is there a required review period or appeal period or anything like that?
Yes, there could be an appeal. There's a 10-day appeal period typically after the Planning Commission where a decision could be appealed to the City Council.
Okay. And then the last question is, if we wanted to discuss those two items here from the dais, is there anything legally that we can do to perhaps shorten this time period?
Perhaps. However, and I'll let the city attorney speak to that, but just sort of in the grand scheme of things, it does take staff some time to work with the applicant on pre-application process, and then state law allows cities to have 30 days to deem an application complete. And in the zoning ordinance, it notes that the planning director has that period of time. Typically, it's in the first 30 days. A lot of times it happens much quicker than that. And with the staffing resources that we have on hand, currently, at current staffing levels, to push that up would be a strain on the Planning Division.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. Survey, you mentioned there'd be 45 days before it gets to the Planning Commission. If the Planning Commission approved the special use permit and there were no appeals, then that would be it. The City Council would never see it then?
That's correct.
Okay. We would only see it if it was appealed.
If it was appealed, or if the Planning Commission decided that they wanted to kick it up to the City Council for consideration. So they could theoretically do that.
Would they approve it and kick it up, or would they just say, we don't want to make a decision and kick it up?
Yeah, typically we would encourage them to do, and I'm sure what they would do, is make a recommendation and just to the City Council.
So in practice, you're anticipating that if this happens, we may see most of these if they come through?
I wouldn't say most of them, but if there's one that's highly controversial, if there's one specific site that's very controversial, it's likely that you may see it.
Great, thank you.
Vice Mayor Lewis?
Just to continue to hone in on the timing front, it's 45 days from the point it's been presented to Planning Commission?
It's 45 days following application. So once somebody pays the fee,
and has a complete application, that's when the 45-day time clock starts.
It's from, let's see here, I have it right here. It's from the start of the application, as my understanding is right at the start of the application. It's 45 days from, yeah, that's right, when it's deemed complete. Let's see here.
So we'd have to get to the planning commission from the start, the time the application is accepted, within 45 days?
Within 45 days, there must be a decision by the planning commission.
From the time the application is complete, I think that's
Yeah.
what the code provides.
Gotcha.
And you have these time limits in because there's due process. There may be some people in favor, there may be some people against, and you have to provide public notice, so we have to
I
go
was just
through
wondering
all the road.
when the timing started, that's all, because if it started after it got to planning commission, it takes 2 or 3 weeks to get to planning commission, then that's all. Just, thank you.
Well, let me ask you a question regarding next steps. Assuming that we approve this 10-month, 15-day time period, what happens during that period or after that period?
During the period, the period is necessary to allow us to have time to bring the West Side specific plan uses to the Planning Commission. So in the next few months, the intent is for the Planning Division to bring the West Side specific plan to the Planning Commission to discuss uses. Does some change need to occur in the West Side specific plan? What types of uses are appropriate? Maybe the West Side specific plan is okay the way it is. Maybe the market's okay the way it is, but they need to consider those things. So that's really the first step in the next few months, and that's part of the strategic plan as well. In the meantime, if anybody comes forward, if any of the downtown tenant spaces in excess of 2,500 square feet become vacant, we'll keep an eye on that, and hopefully the property owners will be aware of that. We usually do keep an eye on that, and business owners typically when they come to town, they check in. At that point, once somebody checks in or the property owner asks, we'll note that you do need to get a conditional use permit, and we would help them through the application process and sit down with them prior to application and explain the whole process to them.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions for Al? And this is a public hearing. I'd like to open the public hearing. We have 2 speaker slips. If others would like to address the council, please fill out a slip, pass it up, and we'll put you in line. The first is from Mr. Talon Taskian, or Ms., I'm sorry.
No, that's okay.
Just for the record, give us your name and city of residence, please.
Yes, sir. My name is Tallene Tashin, and I live in Los Altos and doing business in San Carlos. So good evening, Mayor Davids, Vice Mayor Lewis, and honorable members of the City Council. My name is Tallene Tashin. I'm an attorney appearing on behalf of my parents, Ben and Haigui Tashian, who are property owners of 1245 San Carlos Avenue. They're also proprietors of Oriental Rugs and Interiors, and we've been very happy to be members of the downtown San Carlos community for approximately the last 5 years or so. So we found this to be a really great town. I've had an opportunity to review the proposed ordinance and the city staff's recommendation, and while I was reviewing it, I had several concerns and some suggestions on perhaps different approaches that the City Council might want to consider. I did email them earlier. I have copies of them for you, which I'd like to distribute, if that's okay.
Please.
Shall I pass it to the city clerk?
Please.
So first and foremost, one of our primary concerns is that the proposed ordinance is going to be significantly financially burdensome and cause an unduly lengthy process for any new tenants who want to enter into a structure that's larger than 2,500 square feet. As Mr. Savoy just clarified for the council, there will need any new applicant will need a conditional use permit application, which at the time that we did one 3 years ago cost in excess of, I believe, $2,400, and I'm sure it's gone up since then. Subsequent to that, the Planning Commission will need to, or the city staff will need to consider it. That takes some time. I believe Mr. Savoy made a comment that pre-application process is deemed complete I believe the City Council has 30 days to deem the pre-application process complete. So subsequent to that, it will then go before the Planning Commission. They have up to 45 days. And after that, then there's a 10-day period of time, which there's a wait period of time. So no business can, in effect, commence operating its business for a minimum of 55 days. So that's 2 months and $2,500. And that is an impediment to business. And you might say, okay, well, 2 months, 3 months, $2,500, how big of an impediment is that really? But the fact of the matter is when a tenant is considering moving into a downtown area and they're considering Belmont, Redwood City, San Mateo, and they have to deal with these kinds of issues with the city of San Carlos, that could in fact be a significant impediment on business. And you really want to be, I know the City Council is interested in being a business-friendly community and not one that imposes a lot of obstructions to entering into business. Another thing that kind of came to my attention as I was reviewing this ordinance is that what's interesting is the city is concerned about a clearance discount retailer, or from what I've heard, a $1 store. What's interesting about the proposed ordinance is that it doesn't prevent the $1 store from opening up in 90% of the downtown, because this ordinance only applies to structures that are 2,500 square feet or greater. And yet most of your downtown is less than 2,500 square feet. So this ordinance has far-reaching impacts in terms of its effects on businesses that are moving into these structures of greater than 2,500 square feet, but doesn't necessarily effectuate the purpose of the city, which is to prevent certain types of tenants from entering into these larger buildings. Is that clear? I'm not sure if what I'm saying is...
Yes.
Yeah, okay. So I also was kind of thinking into what some other viable options would be that would kind of serve both purposes, that wouldn't hinder business but would further the city's purposes of being able to evaluate the uses of these buildings. And one thing that's really great is that we have a structure in place, and that is the Central Retail Core zoning. And I have a copy of that. I'd like to. I'm sorry, I only have one left there. When you look at the first page, it talks about, applicability. It goes on to talk about acceptable uses in the downtown area. It goes on to talk about prohibited uses. And look, it talks about conditional uses. So the city does have a framework in place in which it does govern the types of retail uses it allows in its downtown area. What I would suggest is that the city consider, instead of adopting a zoning amendment that only partially deals with the situation at hand and kind of has resulting implications that are significant to businesses which it doesn't intend to target, I would propose that it consider amending this zoning ordinance specifically for the downtown Central Retail Core and considering what types of uses the city wants to prohibit. For instance, the discount retail stores, and prohibit those uses or list those uses under conditional uses, which would then require a conditional use permit. That way the city can require that those types of uses won't be acceptable in any building, not just buildings that are over 2,500 square feet. It would reach buildings of any size, and it wouldn't impede businesses which have legitimate business purposes, which further the city's interests, which bring the types of opportunities that this city wants to move forward with. So I think that's another legitimate consideration. So I want to point that out. I know that Mr. Savoy was saying that to date the city doesn't have any kind of rules in place on how to handle a new applicant, new business into a vacant building, and that's not true. That's clearly not true. There's zoning ordinances which very clearly handle what types of uses are acceptable, what types of uses are not acceptable, and what types of uses are conditional. And I think that there are several options that the city can consider in how to handle this situation. So I kind of also want to point out that the proposal in let me see here. The current interim zoning remains into effect by my calculations until May 11, 2007. I realize that you've probably just been approached with these suggestions today. So if in the instance you are undecided, I would urge the council to continue this matter until the following meeting or even the meeting after that. And in the instance you decide to do that, this will not negatively impact the current status. The current temporary ordinance is in effect until May 11th. That ordinance does prevent the clearance discount retailer from entering into, or requires them to have a conditional use permit. So, and lastly, we request that the City Council vote to deny this ordinance and instruct the city staff to reconsider other alternatives that are more business friendly and serve to effectuate the purposes of the city more effectively. Thank you very much for your time. And lastly, I want to acknowledge that I recognize that city council members aren't here for, they're not here because this position is financially lucrative. I recognize that you're all public servants, and so I want to thank you for your time.
Thank you.
Does anyone have any questions?
Any questions for the speaker? Thank you very much. Next in order is Elizabeth Puccinelli.
Hi, thank you. I'm Elizabeth Puccinelli. I live in Marin County, but I'm here on behalf of my family. And my family has a long history in downtown San Carlos. My grandfather and great-grandfather built many buildings in downtown San Carlos, including two of the buildings that we currently own in the core downtown that is impacted by this zoning regulation. My grandparents built their house in 1936 on Elm Street, and my aunt still lives in that home, so we have been paying property taxes here since the 30s, and it's clearly a community that we care a lot about, so this is why I'm here today. However, we think this is a bad policy. I unfortunately just recently learned about this proposed zoning ordinance. I know there was an interim ordinance that, as was mentioned, was focused on one very specific building, and as I understand it, one very specific proposal that came forward. But this expansion to the greater downtown area, I think, has not fully been thought through for a couple of reasons that were previously articulated. One of my other frustrations is the notification process, and I know you have timeframes in terms of trying to keep your business running quickly, your business of running the city, but I didn't receive the notice till April 2nd, and with the Easter holiday, it was very difficult, and I have numerous family members that I need to contact, and it's a very difficult situation. So that's one of the concerns I want to voice, is the shortness of notice. I believe this ordinance, as said, 2,500 square feet is a very small square footage, first of all. So the threshold that you're talking about is a small square footage. It will negatively impact people's ability to engage in negotiations. At what point does one come and fill out this use application? Do you do it at the beginning of your negotiation? Just because otherwise the tenant's not going to want to spend legal dollars and time to further a negotiation. If you do it at that beginning phase, maybe you get that use permitted, but then the negotiation doesn't go forward. So then you go back to ground zero. So I think there's a much longer time frame that is going to be added in terms of the businesses than this notion of just 45 days or the 30 days plus the 45 days plus the 10 days plus, as was mentioned, a possible appeal process. And it doesn't seem like the leasing of your downtown should be happening in a public forum. Should really the Planning Commission and the public hearing be a place where leasing decisions are being made? As was mentioned, you do have a zoning ordinance in place that lists what can go in within a certain zoning district. There are currently already many restrictions in terms of number of financial institutions, how closely they can be located to one another. But to me, this is a great added burden that you're putting on the downtown that in many ways is still a struggling downtown. It's on the verge of turning around, but it's not there. And I really believe that this is an added level of burden that you're going to be putting on the ability to attract tenants in a competitive marketplace. It's a competitive marketplace, and if people feel that there's this extra added burden on them, I think they're going to be less likely to choose San Carlos. And I think San Carlos is going to develop a reputation for being a difficult place to do business, one where people are going to be more likely to look at other communities just across the border where they can find a nice situation. And again, just thinking about why 2,500 square feet, why did that number come about? I understand there was some study that was produced that said 2,500 square feet is an important square footage to look at. But if what we're really talking about is the one particular situation, I think that's more of a 20,000 square foot situation. Why do we go from 20,000 square feet all the way down to 2,500 square feet? That's a pretty large change that is happening there. And the notion of the additional fees, I think a lot of interesting issues have been raised in terms of what kind of level of burden. So I would strongly ask that at least, and I'm happy to at least have this chance today to express some of my views, but I feel like as a major stakeholder in this city, a stakeholder that's been a part of the city for many, many years, I was disappointed that the city didn't reach out to us and talk to us about the situation and what implications might come from it, whether this is the right way to approach it, whether there might be other ways to approach it. So I'd like to ask that this policy not be approved today. At a minimum, you allow for additional time of discussion with the individuals that are going to be severely impacted by this proposed ordinance. So thank you.
Thank you. Any questions for the speaker? Thank you very much. Pat Bell?
I've supported these ordinances as they've come forward, and I'm glad these two young ladies have come to talk about it because it's given me a different viewpoint. My only fear is that if we let this chance go by, if you don't get it done within the period that we have, it takes cities a while to make up their mind and get things done, I've learned. And so there might well be a gap there before the zoning ordinance is amended and everybody agrees and you decide what you're going to do. I would point out that just because you have 10 months doesn't mean that you need to take 10 months. If you can wait 2 more weeks to vote on this and staff can come up with other possibilities, that would be great. But don't just let the time run out and have no control. I would love it if the city could get things done in 45 days. That would be terrific, but I haven't seen that happen lately. So if push comes to shove and you get to that deadline, maybe you can lower the fees or do something. If you have 2 weeks, take 2 weeks and see what the staff can come up with, but don't let the whole thing run out. And if you have to enact it, don't take 10 months. Thanks.
Thank you. Are there any other members of the public who would like to speak on this issue? Is there a motion to close the public hearing?
So moved.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Let me do a couple. Mr. Mayor, just a couple of things from staff side on this, and we've been through it, I know, with the ordinance for the 800 block. But first of all, it only applies to if there's a change of use. If there's no change of use, if a new tenant comes in and it has furnishings, then there's no need to apply for a use permit. If a new tenant comes in and it's a market, and there was a market there before, there's no need to apply for a use permit. I'd also point out that this is just a temporary measure. As Pat Bell indicated, it has an automatic sunset in it, and it doesn't have to go necessarily as far as that sunset provision. It's a temporary measure to allow you to look at what uses you want to have and what is your very important downtown, part of the character of the city. It's based on square footage because we don't know what uses to necessarily allow to go in this size of storefront. The uses that are in the ordinance that legal counsel pointed out, if you look there, most of the uses that are retail uses are permitted. Hardly any are allowed with a conditional use permit. I think that's one of the reasons that staff wants to have this matter studied and looked at by the Planning Commission so that they can look at what uses might be favorable for the city. The May 14th meeting is too late. This ordinance will expire on, the 45-day will expire on May 11th, and we just happen to have a little meeting in between with the PAMF EIR on April 23rd. So the next meeting is May 14th, and by then it's too late to reconsider this one. So, and I just also point out that use permits in downtown areas for changes of uses is not something that's unusual in other cities. It's something that perhaps could have been looked at or should have been looked at a long time ago by San Carlos. So again, it's just a temporary measure. It's not in concrete. It's not here to stay. And after the study is done, whatever may be adopted by the city would then be applicable to the downtown area.
Thank you. Questions for Al?
Mr. Svay, I just wanted to ask, did you and staff consider changing language in the CR zoning language as opposed to?
I just pointed, that would take 6 months to have a zoning ordinance amendment that has to have a CEQA front to it to look at whether, there should be a CEQA document with it, have it go to the Planning Commission for recommendation and up to the City Council for introduction, adoption, and then becoming effective 30 days later. So, I mean, it's a minimum 6-month process, which is why you have a 10-month, 15-day process that's allowed by state law when you're going to study changing your general plan or zoning.
And what we've talked about is on the West Side Plan, trying to do West Side planning so we can affect any zoning changes. What's the best case timeline for something like that?
5 to 6 months.
My question is just follows up your statement, and that is revoke process. And I think the city attorney alluded to this. If we get something done in a quicker time period, do we need to revoke the emergency ordinance, or do we? How do we bring it to a fine conclusion?
That's exactly how we would do it. If you had something else to adopt to amend the West Side specific plan and or the zoning code, we would also put this back on for rescission.
Okay, thank you.
The 2,500 square feet, was that, two parts to this question. Where did the number come from? I guess that's the first part.
Well, the number came from a study that was done by the Downtown Retail Task Force. And the Downtown Retail Task Force study, that committee identified 2,500 square feet as a size of a tenant space that could act as a key tenant space, as a catalyst to change development and act as a catalyst for other retailers.
Okay. Second part of the question is, do we know how many parcels of 2,500 square feet are in this area, relative to how many parcels are in this area?
Relative to the number of parcels, off the top of my head, I don't have that number. However, I can tell you there's about 10 tenant spaces in the 600 and 700 blocks, and another 6 in the 11 and 1,200 blocks. And if you think about all the banks, U.S. Bank, Bank of America, Wells Fargo, Diddums, Blockbuster, there's an antique store, Foodville. So that's the scale of the buildings that we're talking about. It's not the smaller.
So in effect, we're talking about, in this ordinance tonight, we're talking about approximately 16 to 20 parcels, say 16, I'll take your number, 16. And of those, it sounds like you just named about 5 or 6, at least in the bank. Perhaps, I can't say Diddums or Blockbuster, but I could certainly say the banks probably aren't moving tomorrow. Maybe they are, but maybe not. But anyway, there's 16 parcels is what we're talking about tonight.
Yes, so maybe 15% or 10% of the number of
parcels. Well, I don't know.
Yeah.
That's why I was asking the second part.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you.
I have one other question that I thought of, because Mr. Svay mentioned a bank, and I'm thinking of the, what we all know of as the Samtrans building. Now, I suppose, even just on one side of the lobby, a very large tenant, if they vacated and something like, and I think right now both
estate office.
Both are real estate offices on the ground floor, so if one of those real estate offices vacated on either side of the lobby, this would kick in?
That's correct.
If it was something other than a real estate office that wanted to take the space?
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Any more general discussion?
General discussion, yes.
Yes.
I have no more questions, but I do have general discussion.
All right. Brian?
General discussion.
General? Mm-hmm.
Well, I'd just like to say I think both speakers are well-spoken and bring up really good points. I can speak for myself and perhaps some of the different discussions I've had. I know I don't feel as though that we're in an optimum situation by any means. It does feel that our general plan isn't specific enough that we feel comfortable right now with what it potentially exposes us to, honestly. And I think that what we need to do is we need to have a general plan that reflects what we really want, what reflects what our vision is, the city's vision is for the downtown core. It's what we're actually, obviously, we don't want any negative intent whatsoever on the part of attracting businesses to San Carlos. It's quite the opposite. In fact, in this case, we want the opposite intent, which is we are concerned about what the downtown retail experience is in San Carlos, and it's for that very reason that we are considering this option tonight. In other words, so we can have the time to put a plan together that has a general plan that reflects what our goals are, so we can prevent certain uses of downtown, so it doesn't start a domino pattern in a direction that we don't want to see the town go in. I agree that I think we're at a critical time for the downtown core, and I think that it's our job to get a plan together that we all buy off on, that everybody can join our city and understand what that vision is, so we're all moving together on that. At least a general plan that reflects what can happen, what we don't want to see happen in town. It's my understanding, discussion with staff, that the timing, that this is our solution for the situation that's presented itself in town. But I do think that you bring up some great points, and I think exactly the things that you bring in as city council consideration are things that we're exactly going to consider. I just don't know whether or not we've got the timing mechanism in place in order to put off this 10-month thing. And I think if we do move forward with the 10-month item, we have to get on a very short course to turn around this plan. Because if there's any detriment to people being attracted to San Carlos, we're going backwards, and we need to be careful about that.
Thank you. Councilmember Grocott?
Well, I'm frustrated because I don't like imposing any more on business than is necessary. I do think I'll point this out because I think it's important to point out. Back when Mr. Garvey was the city manager, we had an opening in one of our tenant spaces that the city owns, and the applicant was a dollar store. And he had authority as city manager on how to negotiate for that space, and he turned them down because he knew that that was not the kind of business we wanted to see on San Carlos Avenue in our town. So we acted in that manner as a city, as a property owner, or offering a lease to someone for the benefit of the look of this town. We turned down a tenant and we waited until we got a better tenant that we felt was more appropriate for that location. I think where I'm frustrated is we're in this situation perhaps because a landowner didn't look at that kind of thing and just said, well, here's the best, bang for my buck. I'm going to take this tenant, and not with consideration necessarily of what's best for our downtown. I don't like being put in that position where we have to respond to that, and quite frankly, we're not looking at this because as council members, we, discussed it earlier, or said, not one of us really came up and said, we need to stop this, we need to look at this. We're discussing this tonight because we heard from our citizens, and our citizens are the ones who look at this kind of thing and say, we want a certain look to our downtown, and a dollar store doesn't fit. It's not what we want to see there. So what we're doing as elected officials is responding to the people of this town, the people who live here, who have concerns like this. So beyond that, my only concern has to do with the time period. If there were a way to shorten it, I would like to do that. I don't see that as being really possible, except to ask that staff, if something happens and an application comes in, that staff act with all expediency to get it done. And in terms of fees, I don't know if we want to discuss lowering those fees for just this ordinance, the applicants who come in under this ordinance, or what we might want to do there, but that's the only item I could see discussing.
Okay. Councilmember Griselli?
My other council members have pretty much said most of the thoughts that I have. As Ms. Puccinelli said, I don't think, I'm also of the idea that I'd hate to have leasing decisions in public. I don't think that's a good way to run government or business. But as Councilmember Grocott said, we're put in this position not because we want to be, but because we sort of have to be as we're sitting up here. If city leaders don't take a forward, proactive approach certain times in things that happen in their city, the city can go crazy around them. When this first came up, that's why I was asking Mr. Savay, how many units are we speaking, how many parcels are we speaking about? And 16 doesn't seem like an inordinate amount, unless I guess you're one of the 16, and your choices might be compromised. I appreciate that this can go over 10 months, but I'm hopeful that it's going to go less than that after we get our general plan worked up. I'm also hopeful that perhaps, as Councilmember Grocott said, I feel maybe we should look at our fees, and I know our fees are not based on anything but basic cost recovery. But this is a special ordinance in a special time, and perhaps we should look to say, if it's $2,000 approximately, we just make it $1,000 for anything for the next 10 months and 45 days for any special use permit. Now, I realize there could be 20 of them that come through, and the city may lose $20,000. Somehow, I don't think that's going to happen. But we are going to if we do enact this, it is going to impact people's economics. So I don't know whether we can even discuss this since it technically, I guess, wasn't on the agenda, but it seems to me that it's part and parcel of this ordinance that we would come up with. It's not an easy decision to make on this, but I think government has to act sometimes when it has to, and I think this is one of the times that we have to act, realizing that this, again, as has been said, is not cast in stone or concrete forever.
Well, let's defer to the city attorney regarding the fee question.
As long as it's specific to this ordinance, for the uses that would be considered, if any, under this ordinance, you can do whatever you'd like with the fees.
Okay.
Just for these uses pertaining to this ordinance.
So that element is on the table. As far as my comments are concerned, I don't want to repeat what's been said, and I pretty much agree with my fellow council members. I'm brought aware again of the fact that this is a change of use. It's not the same use. If a furniture store goes out, another one comes in, that's permitted. The fee is a question that we can get into momentarily, but I think that's a valid concern. I do think that the process, though, is a benefit for everybody. It's a benefit for our residents of our city. It's a benefit for staff. It's a benefit for council and for primarily, I think, for the property owners. I think that by doing this, we will come out with a better plan for downtown which will support and enhance values rather than diminish values. If there's a hot item going on a 2,500 square foot store that's of high value to the owner and of high value to the city, I don't think there's a problem in paying a little bit to get the process, get the process through. So in the long run, I think that this is something that has to be done, and it's something that will be of large benefit rather than diminished benefit for those involved. So I basically support the resolution, but let's have some discussion on fee.
I would like to establish some kind of cap, and I don't want to hurt staff and their reimbursement of being reimbursed for their time, but I think if we could look at something a little lower.
Maybe City Manager Weiss might be able to weigh in on
what that might want to be.
Right number might want to be. Excuse me, City Manager Weiss.
He's letting his staff consult.
We're consulting.
We're having a little sidebar here. Excuse us, please.
Yeah, the problem with a cap is what if there's a traffic study needed or something that was extensive, something related to CEQA could get expensive and you wouldn't want to have a cap. I mean, we were talking about maybe 50% of the fee that's, the base fee that's in the fee schedule, something like that.
Do we know, what is the base fee? Do we know?
I believe it's about $2,700. That's the number I'm
So automatically,
remembering. It's something.
if I have
50% of that.
if I had a furniture store and a market wanted to go into my furniture store, then immediately it would be a minimum of $2,700, and then it could go on from there.
That's correct.
Okay. So the fees that are talked about are, in a way, minimum fees. They're not all-encompassing fees.
Yes, generally that's true.
Because of what the city attorney just mentioned, if it was big enough parcel, there might be a traffic thing or there might be some other issues.
I just don't think that we're, that all being said, and looking at the parcels that have been talked about, I don't think we're, I don't think we're going to see two applications of this type. So the overall cost to the city is going to be pretty minimal, even if we get one of these in and we have to eat it, as it were. But
I agree. Remember, we're talking only 10 months. Unless there's a lot of negotiating going on that I'm not aware of, I just don't see it happening.
So maybe a thought is do 50% of the fee, $13.50 for application fee, and that should be further incentive for us and staff to get moving on the West Side plan.
there you go.
Yeah.
Yes. Okay. I would concur.
Is there a
with
motion to
that.
that effect? Well, first of all, we need a motion on the draft ordinance.
Have we closed the public hearing? Yeah, we did. Yeah, okay. Then I would, what am I trying to do here?
Just suggest that you adopt the ordinance with that amendment in Section 3 with respect to the fee, and I'm sure that...
Okay. So I would like to make a motion to adopt the ordinance with an amendment to Section 3 regarding fees, that fees would be capped at $1,350.
I'll second the motion for ordinance number.
Would you like to read the ordinance, please?
Sure.
Extension of interim zoning ordinance of the City of San Carlos pursuant to Government Code Section 65858A regarding retail uses within the 600 and 700 blocks of Laurel Street and the 1100, 1200 blocks of San Carlos Avenue.
All right, we have Councilmember Grocott made the motion, seconded by Vice Mayor Lewis. Is there a roll call, please?
Councilmember Grocott?
Yes.
Councilmember Lewis?
Yes.
Councilmember Grisilli?
Yes.
Mayor Davids?
Yes.
Through the chair,
Yes.
I would like to have perhaps a city manager or staff bring back an item, if not next time, because we're going to have an awfully full agenda, I'm sure, but the time after, to have this also apply to the ordinance that we passed last week.
800 block.
For the 800 block of...
In terms of fees.
Do we need to, I assume, have that brought back?
Yeah, I believe we would have
We don't have to, we don't...
bring it back.
I'd love to not to, but I think we do, don't we?
We may be able to bring back the fee schedule for that. But
And I'd also just like to make sure we invite the speakers to participate in the West Side plan process that we're going to be embarking on. You make good points, and I think that people aren't in disagreement with that. I'm sorry?
Sorry, when is the meeting?
We'll have a plan forthcoming when we're starting on that process? Unless you have one now, Mr. Survey.
No, I don't have any specific meeting dates, but we will make it widely publicized. And if I could just clarify through the mayor, that was 50% of the base fee, the base conditional use permit fee, right?
That's correct.
Yes.
Yeah. Just
I said cap. Yeah.
Oh, total fees, meaning if there's an environmental document or a circulation study, then it's 13, whatever half the fee is, period. The city would pay for the environmental study.
No, I was not thinking of the other fees that may come along and be involved in the process, just the application.
Okay, very good, thank you.
All right, are we clear?
Hold on.
You voted on one thing, you voted.
It's a language cap.
We voted on the, we voted on the application fee,
It's a cap, but
for the application fee.
there are other fees that you...
Through the chair.
Yeah.
Mr. Mayor.
We have, what we're doing is capping the application fee. If there are additional fees for traffic studies, environmental impact reports, whatever they might be, those would have to be covered on the part of the owner. But the city will cap at 50%, which we determined to be $1,350, the amount of...
fee. And you agreed on $1,350. Now the chairman is coming up with a whole lot of other unknown fees.
Well, the motion is that we cap at $1,350 the application fee, the basic application. Other studies, other fees beyond that would be the responsibility of the owner if the process goes forward.
Mr. Mayor, you haven't moved on to your next order of business yet. If there's some feeling that you want to clarify this, you could just reintroduce the ordinance with this clarification.
Is there a recording of it? Can we play back the recording of it?
No.
Through the chair, I mean, I would be happy to, if Mr. Grocott would want to reintroduce it, just as Mr. Lanzone said, then we get it specific, exactly the words that are supposed to be used.
So why don't we do this again?
Sure. And if I may, so I'm going to make a motion again.
You'll make a motion again.
Yes, and I just want to be clear, despite Mr. Savay asking the question, when I made my motion, in my mind, and I'm sorry if it wasn't clear to the audience, in my mind it was clear what I was making a motion about, which was the application fee. That's why we asked about what's the base fee. So that being understood and understanding that there are other fees that can come along with environmental impact, traffic studies, et cetera. So that was my understanding when I made the motion. I will make the motion again, then, that we approve ordinance 1387 of the City of San Carlos. Now I've lost my place. Get over here.
And would you read the ordinance, please?
Yes, I will. Okay, draft ordinance number 1387, extension of interim zoning ordinance of the City of San Carlos pursuant to Government Code Section 65858A regarding retail uses within the 600 and 700 blocks of Laurel Street and the 1100 and 1200 blocks of San Carlos Avenue, with one change as it is written here, and that is that the application fee would be capped at $1,350.
Just to be clear, the base application fee and no other fees.
Right.
No other associated fees.
Other fees would apply.
And will you second that, please?
Yes. Second.
Jim? Now we may have a roll call, please.
Councilmember Grocott?
Yes.
Councilmember Lewis?
Yes.
Councilmember Grisilli?
Yes.
Mayor Davis?
Yes. Thank you all for your comments, and please, as was mentioned before, work with us on the West Side plan so we can come up with the very best plan possible for our downtown area.
Ladies on I have paid $10,000 4 years ago for my application, and it took me 7 months to get my license. Now we are discussing here business and a commercial zone area where I could not conduct for 7 months. And this is a city, among all the cities I've been doing business, is the worst toward business. This is why
We are here objecting to this plan to change it, to make it more friendly, and you do have all the conditions to limit somebody's operation if it's not proper business. No one is going to bring in any unwanted business to their property. We are property owners. We don't want any problems with anybody. But putting obstacles, making it unfriendly to businesses, prolonging, taking vacations, not being available in August because of agenda is full, and throwing another month, having private consultations over and over, and finally, after 7 or 8 months, giving somebody a license is unheard of. This only happens in San Carlos. And I am frustrated because you are all trying to help, but you don't realize what we go through. And, you know, you have other chances of putting ordinances to make those businesses that are unwanted to say we cannot allow these businesses, make it known. Once those are known, then people won't be bringing an application to you.
Thank you for your comments. We understand your point. All we're asking for and all we've done is to allow ourselves 10 months to review the issue. And if during that time you choose to bring another use into your property, it would have to go through the process that we approved. But it's only a 10-month situation. And at the time where everything is completed within 10 months and we have new rules in place, we have new uses reviewed, it'll be business as usual, and hopefully it'll work better than ever. But we will be protecting our downtown. We will be protecting the use.
There. I mean, we are not against it. Obviously, we are part of it. And we are more part of it than some of the smaller businesses. We are there every day and going through this. But my concern is you are starting something that this was not in Menlo Park or Palo Alto. I had business, or San Francisco for many, many years. And this is new. This is not widespread as council is talking about. And it's unnecessary. If you don't want our business, just state it so everybody knows, and we don't want it either. Let's make it clear. Why go through the process for the same idea that we don't want that property being occupied?
But, sir, we don't operate in a vacuum. We don't just sit here and determine arbitrarily what we want and what we don't want. We go through a citizen's process, a building owner's process, a business person's process, and we determine as a community what is best for the downtown. And I think you'll enjoy being a part of that process.
Mr. Mayor, I have no objection whatsoever. What you're saying is you're concerned and I'm concerned. Again, we're part of it. We're all together. And I see Mr. Crockett most every day walking through. We talk to each other. We're friends. But when the city planning department comes up with an idea and presents it to you, 90% of the time the city council is okay with this plan. But think of it the other way. Think of it in my shoes or somebody else like Mrs. Puccinelli, and what she's going to go through next time she has a tenant, possibility of a tenant. 4 months, 5 months maybe, before an application is finalized and tenant comes in. Just in the size of 10,000 square foot, that's anywhere between $100,000 loss of income. It's, unproductive, unnecessary. If you don't like to see, Dollar Store stated so somewhere in one of the ordinances, 10, 35, 56, I believe, and 62. But two ordinances already clearly states those businesses cannot locate in downtown San Carlos. So why not make it so clear that other businesses cannot? And we know if we're going to rent our properties to whom to rent and not to rent, so we have no loss. I mean, this is why we are here.
We understand. Thank you, and please work with us during the next 10 months.
All right.
We'll move ahead now to item 8A, which is consideration of a resolution approving the Second Amendment and restated joint exercise of powers agreement for the Belmont San Carlos Fire Department. Mr. Weiss.
Mr. Mayor, members of the City Council, this is a joint powers agreement that has been in process of negotiation for nearly a year now. In one form or another. And I've outlined within the staff report the changes within the joint powers agreement from the first amendment that was before you prior to the assessment election last fall. We've summarized within the report the formula, which is based upon 25% population, 25% assessed value, 25% number of companies, and 25% on the number of calls. We've also itemized for you the year one factor of each of those categories to show you what the percentage breakdown for the formula would be applicable to the city and the district in Belmont in the first year. The ballpark estimate is that with revenues factored in, which is one of the changes, is that revenues now will be accounted for by allocating it pursuant to the either from where the revenue was generated from, or pursuant to the formula being applied to generic revenue that comes into the department directly. All of that combined into the formula. The current analysis would suggest that in year one, the formula split would be roughly 52% San Carlos, 48% the district in Belmont. We would note that if calls, which are the most volatile of the categories we believe, stabilize at 50-50, we would expect our formula share to go up a little bit. And the revenues, again, are probably a little bit harder to project. But in any event, we're expecting between 52 and 53% would be the San Carlos share pursuant to the agreement. As you might recall, one of the last issues that was being discussed related to the share of unfunded liabilities, and where this agreement leaves that matter is for the unfunded liabilities to be paid moving forward pursuant to the formula in place each year. The city attempted to apply the 50-50 formula to the outstanding and unfunded liabilities. We're not successful in getting that language included into this agreement. There is a provision within the agreement that should Belmont initiate termination of the agreement, that there would be an amortized payment schedule to partially offset the share that would be the differential between the formula split for those unfunded liabilities. Again, that is applicable if Belmont initiates the termination, but not if San Carlos initiates that termination. Beyond that, I don't think I'll get into the details of the legal nuances of the agreement. Joan Kasman, Special Legal Counsel, is here in the audience if there are legal questions with respect to the agreement, and other staff are available to discuss any level of detail that the City Council would like to discuss. The matter is before you upon recommendation of the Fire Department for authorization to approve the JPA this evening. Mr. Mayor?
Okay, thank you very much. Questions for Mark?
I just have one question, and that is regarding the memo that you sent to Chief Fry about the the past incurred liabilities and recovering them at a 50-50 level, and a couple of different ways to accomplish that goal. Is that something that you're comfortable as a fairly straightforward process?
At the staff level, we were, yes. And we thought that there were difficulties suggested with respect to working out a payment directly with the state that would split that obligation, because the state is looking at the fire department as an entity and was uncomfortable with setting up special accounting to accommodate this one issue. But certainly, as we outlined within that memorandum, there are ways to track that side fund, and there are ways to accommodate the payments that are being made and tracking it 50-50 versus whatever the formula might be, and giving one side or another credit. I will say that as part of the negotiation, while we were not successful in getting that component acknowledged by the district or incorporated into the JPA, that one of the trade-offs that came forward at that time was the suggestion that the revenue that came into the department would be accounted for on a formulaic basis, as opposed to what was previously done by putting that revenue above the line, which really would have split it again 50-50, as it always had been. Now at least it will be split according to the new formula.
Yeah, which is sort of what I expected would have been done. But anyway, thank you very much.
Our two fire commissioners are here. Any words of wisdom from you all?
Well, I don't have any questions. Appreciate the staff report.
We will.
Yeah. And just to some extent, I suppose, address Councilmember Lewis's or Vice Mayor Lewis's question about the past liabilities. We did look at the machinations of it. It did seem like during the discussions, it went both ways. I mean, we were told you could, our staff especially felt like it's doable. I think the finance director, the department, also felt like it was doable, but there was some extra work involved to keep track of it. But I think primarily what it came down to was a political question.
Sorry?
A political question. Was that element to stand there and fight for that? Was that advisable politically? And what it came down to was no, it was not. It became a insurmountable issue. But that's also why we then took a look at the revenue aspect, as Mr. Weiss mentioned, and brought that into the discussions. And that seemed to be an amiable discussion point that we went forward on and came up with that solution.
So you're, by what if it's political and insurmountable, basically it was a hard line.
That's right.
It was deal or no deal on, and that one element is deal or no deal from the other two fire commissioners?
Not the other two fire commissioners per se, but their read on their district board, what they could expect from their district board to agree, what they could expect their district board to agree to, and also what they were going off of is the just like our council gave Bob and I direction to take into negotiations, they did too, and that was one item that there was not the political willingness to negotiate on that one item.
Was it your impression we had political willingness to negotiate on that item? In other words, I mean, they brought that to the. I don't remember us sort of saying going into it. I guess what I thought the process was, unless you had clear direction, it'd be sort of, boy, we're not sure about that. We tie out of it, and then we discuss it as a council, and then we go back in that item.
Well, let's put it this way. I think, no, not necessarily, but then being creative and coming up with some other points to negotiate and discuss was, I think, our solution to move the ball down the court and try to score a goal.
I don't have any questions. Whatever the next step is for public comment or whatever, and then get into discussion.
We do have one request for public comment, Pat Bell, and others are invited if they choose. Please come forward after Pat.
Pat Bell, San Carlos. I would just add on that point that it's also a pretty small amount of money. Councilmember Grisilli can tell us how much, but it didn't come out to a lot of money, and meeting after meeting after meeting after meeting, you would not believe how much time was spent on this issue. And what it came down to was something like $15,000 a year, and let's get this done. And just vote yes. I mean, I could stand here and use up my entire 2 minutes and everybody else's 2 minutes in the room to tell you why you should vote yes, but this has been vetted and wordsmithed and picked apart and put back together so many times, and this is just what it came down to, that this was the best way to save this fire department, get it back on the road, and start talking about some of the things that Chief Fry talked about earlier that we really need to be spending our time and money on, instead of, are you getting a $15,000 better deal than we're getting? Let's not go down that road again. You haven't been down that road the 23 times that some of us in this room have, but believe me, it's been discussed. And then Mr. Grocott, I believe, was the one who said, well, if that's the way, if we're going to do it that way, then how about having the income be divided by the same formula? And so there is an offset, so maybe it's less than $15,000 now. Anyway, it's not a lot of money. So just vote yes. Thank you.
Thank you, Pat. This is not a public hearing, but would anyone else like to speak on the issue? Yes.
Brian Randall, San Carlos. Once again, I'd like to speak out for the fire service. I'd like to thank you for all you've done to save this fire department, and I'd like you to continue along those lines. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Anyone else? Yes, John?
John Hoffman, Crestview Drive, San Carlos. Just do it.
Anyone else? All right, let's have some discussion before we call for a motion. Who'd like to lead off? Starting on my left.
Well, I don't have much more to add.
Okay.
And what you see in the staff report and the JPA agreement as written is, as has been said, was a lot of work continuing on from December, I guess January, when we first started meeting on this. And I think Mr. Grisilli and I gave it our best shot to come up with something that we thought would both, in all regards, I think, be as fair as possible. And, the reason we took a look at the revenue side is because we thought, well, if we're going to have a formula that's going to look at expenses, then it should apply to revenue as well. And although we did, as has been done in the formula, we did want to get full credit for any revenues that were generated from within our city for things like plan checks and so forth. So that's all I have to say.
Thank you. Bob?
As Councilmember Grocott said, we've been at this a while. I guess December of 2005 or January of 2006. How many months that is? 14, 16 months. Going into this, I think both of us tried to approach it in the fact that we had a good fire service. We wanted to keep the fire service that we had. We looked at a myriad of options. I know we looked at splitting, we looked at percentages, we looked at a lot of different things. The economies of scale of going on our own were just, to me, just didn't make any economic sense whatsoever. Possible mergers with other municipalities, we looked at that long and hard. That was not necessarily going to be a benefit economically to us either. The men and women of the fire department have stuck through this for all this time. They've added to their numbers. They've done everything asked of them. They've responded every time they were called. And I think all of us want to have the best fire service that we can. We went into this knowing that Belmont had some issues that they wanted to bring to the fore. They were brought up. Many of them were adopted. Some were not. It was a give-and-take situation. You can look at this from a myriad of directions and say it's a great deal. And that's the way I look at it, because we've got a great fire service. Other people would say, why are we spending this amount of money? And I would perhaps have them look at perhaps some other cities in this county that are no bigger than we are and what they're spending on fire service. And perhaps look at ours and say, wow, I guess we're doing a pretty good job of it. But that all being said, I think that people got together and came to an agreement, and it's for the betterment of the cities of San Carlos and Belmont, for public safety and protection of our property, and more importantly our lives. As the chief said, over half the calls are medical calls, and I believe that the citizens would be well served by approval of this joint powers agreement, and moving forward, as Councilman Grocott said, to concentrate on should we say, the running of the fire department, as opposed to whether we have one or not.
Thank you. Vice Mayor Lewis.
So the costs difference in the unfunded liabilities, what's that total, what's the aggregate dollars for that?
If we assume that the unfunded liabilities include both the GASB as well as the PERS unfunded liability, it's about $17 million. And 3% of $17 million would be $510,000. Paid out over 10 years, that would be, $50,000 plus per year, and $50,000 plus interest. Now, I mean, and that is the position from which we started. We didn't include the truck in that analysis. The city of Belmont put forward arguments that including GASB in that was more challenging, and that it's not a factual liability until such time as the department or until it is acquired by the firefighter. It's an obligation that is paid upon retirement for medical payments, and yet we have tracked it in terms of knowing what that obligation is today on a pro rata basis, and so we included it in the analysis. But it's the smaller of the two funds. If we excluded that, I think it's about $5 million of the $17 million thereabouts. So in the neighborhood of I would estimate $40,000 to $50,000 per year.
Thank you. So it's really not my wish to open up all these elements. As you, I think, all know, and I've publicly stated my support for this fire department trying to make this work. I've been unequivocal in that from the very beginning. That being said, I don't think it's also fair to not still you have the advantage of being on the commission, having some of these discussions. We're on council. It comes to us, and it's a difficult also position to be in as a council member to even question an element that I consider sort of, in my opinion, sort of a disturbing element. We incur liability at 50-50, and I understand there's great negotiations that go on these things. And I understand that there's a depth in this that is difficult for those not involved in negotiation to understand. And I think that you guys have done a fantastic job of sticking with it and coming up with something that's pretty workable. This is just an element of this that I cannot fathom for an instant why it was ever even part of the negotiation. It just seems like so that's the only thing. And what's hard for me is something that's been worked at so hard for you all, and I just think that this element of it, when we're as strapped as we are, we're talking about $500,000, and we can sort of put that in. Now, I completely agree with Councilmember Grocott on the political insurmountable position that we've been put in on a variety of issues. And I think that the perseverance that you guys have had through this process has taken enormous patience, and I really appreciate it. And I think that you guys have gotten the best possible deal out of this situation that we could probably get. My concern is, frankly, that the costs of this are just continuing to go up and up and up and up, and we don't really have a handle on our budgeting situation at this point where we can say we know exactly how we're going to afford this. So does it stick in my craw, the 50, taking this formula for a previously incurred liability? It does. It really does. Do I wish that you guys had more clarity from council going into that negotiation, so perhaps you could have brought that? I also wish that you had that clarity, and I certainly would have weighed in on that earlier if we could have. That being said, again, I think as the costs go up, we have to continually ask ourselves, what are our advantages in the variety of different partnerships that we might be able to create for this fire department? And for where we are right now, given the options that we have on the table, you guys have driven this deal into a place that is workable. And please, just because, so the public and firefighters that are in the audience, I completely support you guys. I love what's been the effort that's gone here, the service level we have, the safety issues that Councilmember Grisilli brought up. I'm 100% behind all of those things. And I just don't want those to deter us from also looking at some of these hardcore financial things that are really, really important issues. And so I just want to say, go ahead, excuse me.
Yeah, if I can respond to part of that. The reason even these so-called unfunded liabilities, and that is a bit of a misnomer because we're funding them. They're in our budget every year. So they're not unfunded in the sense that they just sit there and we can't do anything about it. We are funding them. The other point that I would make on these, I'll just call them liabilities instead of calling them unfunded liabilities. I had some one-on-one discussions with Thomas Phil, the finance director for the department, about what's going on at PERS with these liabilities. And his advice to me is that even PERS is they continue to look at this and how the situation was created and how to get out of the situation, if you will. And they're looking at it all the time too. What this amounts to is liabilities that are forecast for retirement of your employees. And do you have enough money in your fund to cover it? And then what they're also looking at is the money that's coming in, investing it in the market or whatever, and what kind of returns are they getting, and so forth. They are, from what Mr. Phil has told me, they're trying to get creative because they don't want to have these burdens sitting over these agencies that are that would cause problems in terms of public safety. They realize what the situation is, and we're not the only ones in it. Our department, these departments all over the state that have the same situation, or similar situation. So suffice, I guess what I'm trying to say, Brad, is it's not as though it's necessarily a fixed number that's it's due and payable now. It isn't. It's something that's, and the only reason we even studied it or looked at it or happen to know what the number may or may not be is because we were talking about splitting up. And to split up, we were going to have to take these liabilities and do something with them, pay them off. Now that we're not talking about doing that, it's not as though the bill is payable and due now. So things could, even that number could change. And to show how drastically it can change from one year to the next is just look at the number that was in here for the dissolution number that would be owed by Belmont if they pulled the trigger tomorrow. It came down quite a bit because of, where things are.
I do understand the issue. I understand PERS. I understand it's a nationwide issue. All I'm saying is there's an incurred debt at a ratio that we all agreed upon, and I don't understand why we're changing that game. And for me, it's not a negotiation to say that's off the table on one partner's side, and to me, it's not a give to say that because we recover the revenue at the formula. To me, that should go without saying. There's a new formula in place for expenses. There's a new formula in place for revenue. So I think you guys have done great work. I'm totally in support of this department. I think that is a bad portion of the deal, and I just want to, if as we move forward, I guess I'd like to somehow be able to review the process so we can at least get that word out before we come to the situation where we've got it in front of us and the whole thing's there. It's difficult to talk about the element.
Well, the good thing is, Vice Mayor Lewis, is that, of course, in this process, this JPA hasn't been changed in 27 years or 28 years. it's not going to be that, I dare say, in the next 28 years. We have the option, and we will have, to look at this, and I know the members of the Fire Board are going to continue to look at it. This is the first time that first year starting in July that we're going to have a formula. At the end of next year, we may look at this and go, how in the bloody blazes did we figure this one out? It might go one way, it might go the other way. So we might all come to an agreement that maybe it's not the best way to do it. Having said that, the dollars that we're spending on fire service have gone up appreciably, somewhat over $300,000 for the last 4 years. And I don't anticipate that they're going to necessarily go down. We've had some legal obligations. We've had some equipment issues that haven't been addressed. We've had a number of issues. And I think in the new JPA, we're trying to address some of these issues and spending some additional funds to set up some reserves and do the things that we need to do to have a viable department in the 21st century. And let me assure you, as well as the public and everyone else, is that just because we pass this, assuming we do pass this, and we move on and we start to look internally, as Councilmember Grocott said, we're not going to forget what the dollars and cents of it are. And we're going to continue to look at it and try to get the best budget that we can, and also along to balance off with the best fire service. And I know personally for myself, I'm going to continue to look at these numbers. And in the next couple of years, if we need to revisit some of these items, we'll be revisiting them. And I would encourage the other members of the council, under the JPA, the councils have a lot more input than they did before. And granted, at this point, it's Councilmember Grocott and myself on the fire board. In the future, it may be other members of this group. But I think all of us have to keep up to speed and get as much information as we can. And if you're not getting it, you have to come to us or the chief or whatever to make sure we do get it so that we're all educated on this. And I appreciate your comments, and I understand completely where you're coming from. I came from the same direction, and so did Councilmember Grocott on a number of these items. But as you said, when you're in a situation where you want to get something done, we felt this was the way to get it done, and I'm hopeful that it'll come out positively in the future.
And again, just to reiterate, you guys negotiated 28, 30 different components of this. I'm just picking one that I'm not happy with, and I don't want that to be the overall umbrella. I appreciate the good work that you guys have done, and the firefighters for sticking with the situation.
Well, in principle, of course, the Vice Mayor is correct. This liability issue should have been a 50-50 split. However, in the perfect world, there is a matter of negotiation, and negotiation goes on, and there's give and take, and decisions are made. And I respect the work our commissioners did and the commissioners from Belmont as well. And I think that, in my judgment, we have a good agreement to carry forward. Now, funding it is another issue. As you all know, this comes from our operating fund, and this is going to be quite a hit on our budget for the next some years. So we do have an option to go one more step on this. We can either adopt a resolution approving the amended agreement, or we can defer action until we have a chance to consider it at a budget hearing. Dollar-wise, I think the dollars are fixed. It's just a question of how we come up with the money, and I believe that in some fashion we will do that in the budget process eventually. So is there a sense here that this should be deferred until we have a budget hearing, or is there a sense that we ought to carry it and move it forward?
Well, Mr. Mayor, I believe that we should pass this resolution. We have all budget items will come back to the full council, and they will have a full vetting after they have been to the fire board. Your point is certainly well taken that there's going to be hard decisions to make in our budget process on May 7th, or as we begin that process on May 7th. Having said that, it costs extra to run a fire department, and as I mentioned earlier in my comments. If someone can come up to me and guarantee, as they say, that we can do it in a cheaper, more efficient way and still have protection of our citizens, I'd love to hear it. But over the last 16 months, I still have felt that together we're stronger than separate. And having said that also, the dollars in certain areas need to be spent. If we didn't need a fire department, that would be great. But we do. And I think if we do, we're shortchanging ourselves if we don't want to spend the money there. But again, that to me is a secondary issue. I feel tomorrow night, as I understand it, the Belmont City Council or their fire district, rather, meeting as their fire district, will be looking at this. And I believe that the time has come to vote on this and to approve the resolution approving the JPA. And there will be other, I wouldn't say battles isn't the right word, discussions on dollars and cents, and I think that would be the time to talk about them as opposed to deferring this decision. So my choice would be to vote on this, and I'm willing to start to make the motion to begin that process this evening.
And before you do that, is there any preference the other way?
If the yearly amount, I mean, the bulk of this is really in this document, and the bulk of this is not going to change. The fact is, we've got a very tough budget hearing up. We're going to have to fund this. If there was a disposition for council to say, if we delayed this, went through the budgeting thing, that you would feel differently about the 50/50 liability, because that's money that we would save in going into this, then I would support delaying this. But if that's not going to be a decision we're going to come back to on it, most of this deal has been negotiated, and we're ready to move.
All right. And then I think I'm hearing a motion coming from Commissioner.
I'll make a motion that we approve the resolution of the City of San Carlos to approve the restated joint powers agreement for the Belmont San Carlos Fire Department.
Is there a second?
Second.
Roll call, please.
Councilmember Grisilli?
Yes.
Councilmember Grocott?
Yes.
Councilmember Lewis?
Yes.
Mayor Davis?
Yes. All right. Well, moving from one job well done to the next, item 9A, consideration of amending our municipal code to take care of a few cleanup items. City Attorney, you have any comment on this?
Mr. Mayor, I'd be willing to submit it on the staff report. This has become an annual tradition to look through the code and see where we can pare it down and save some pages. Be glad to answer any questions.
Any questions for Bob? Someone like to move the ordinance?
Sure.
I would move approval of ordinance number 1388, City of San Carlos, amending the municipal code section 5.04.080, temporary business registration, chapter 5.52, restaurant permits, and sections 12.04.040 and 050, sidewalk repair permits, and chapter 10.40, bicycles.
Second.
Roll call, please.
Councilmember Grocott?
Yes.
Councilmember Lewis?
Yes.
Councilmember Grisilli?
Yes.
Mayor Davis?
Yes.
And I have just one question, having made the motion. Were we introducing the ordinance, or?
Yes.
That was introduction.
Okay, introduction of the ordinance, then.
All right.
Thank
Going
you.
to come back for final at a later time. Now, we have on item 9B, adopt one or two alternative resolutions providing direction to the city manager on whether or not to continue to explore library drop-box services and how the city will process, or proceed rather, with studying the issue. Mr. Maltby.
Good evening, Honorable Mayor and members of the City Council. My name is Jeff Maltby. I'm the city's Administrative Services Director. This item before you is really meant to be a refresher. We're kind of going back in time tonight to 2005 when the City Council discussed library drop boxes. In May 2005, the Council discussed it, gave verbal direction to staff not to proceed any further with the concept. It was brought back later for clarification in September 2005 with a resolution basically restating the Council's discussion of May 2005. That particular resolution failed to pass on a 2-2 vote. It was a 4-council night, as it is tonight, ironically. The material that I've attached to the staff report, much of it was the same material that we could locate from 2005 in terms of refresher. There's additional material that was received from an updated letter from the library, San Mateo County Library JPA director that's also been attached. Be happy to answer any questions in terms of the material that's attached. As you proceed with your discussion. There are basically two options for you, two resolutions. One would reaffirm that original May discussion on not to proceed. The other resolution would request staff to flush out basically a project proposal that would come back as part of the May 2007 budget study session so that you could consider a library drop box as an enhanced service as part of the overall budget package for next year.
Thank you. Any questions for Jeff at this point?
I was unclear when I read this. Or if we were to move approval, then we're simply approving a budget item that would study the implementation of a Dropbox, and would it begin to look at a preliminary design for a Dropbox, or how far would we go with some kind of project
I think
like
we would go as far as we could without incurring any major costs associated with actual design work. I think we would keep it conceptual and add as part of the budget package any specific design work that would need to be done in terms of traffic circulation and those kinds of elements that would likely be part of it if we're talking about the library parking lot for a location. So really what the second resolution directs staff to do is to go out and flush out what we think would be a total package to come back as part of the budget study session that would include designing, implementing, and then the ongoing operation of a library drop box. So the design costs, installation costs, those are really one-time costs, as well as any services that would maybe be cut at the library so that services could be redirected to this, or additional monies that would be funded to the library to pay for this new service. So.
And how much would the budget be to do to get as far as you suggested then?
To get as far as we suggested, we'd really do that with staff time. So I think that's really the cost here, staff time in implementing this potential program change for the budget, for next year's budget.
Okay.
Anything else for Jeff?
Quick question. Has the Friends of the Library discussed the issue or funding something like this?
I'm not aware that they have. I know in talking to different members on other subjects over the year, they were aware of this particular issue.
I was just going to say at the 2005 hearing, the Friends of the Library testified against the proposal.
Thank you.
Okay, Jeff, don't go too far. I just wanted to mention an email that we received from Margaret Pye. And this will be a part of the record where she objects to the proposal on the basis of cost and circulation and feeling that we had better things to occupy our time. So that will be a part of our record. Now, as far as some input on this, John Hoffman initiated this request, and perhaps John would like to come forward and maybe make a brief presentation.
Don't go too far. John Hoffman, Crestview Drive, San Carlos. The request is, well, let me back up. What Jeff has mentioned maybe is a little bit of the horse behind the cart or the cart in front of the horse. My request was that you determine what the citizens and patrons would like in a fair and objective way, and then act upon that. If the patrons and the citizens say no, that's the end of it. If they say yes, then it proceeds. Just let me make a very brief comment regarding the letter that you mentioned, Tom. It talks about impacting core library services. I think if anybody takes the time and the trouble to contact the libraries, the librarians from the libraries that already have such a convenience, they will find that there is, number one, a minuscule effect, almost to be de minimis. Secondly, that the public and the library patrons are enthusiastic about having this service. She mentions also safety and liability concerns. You may not be aware that there has already been at least one accident that I'm aware of by the cars queuing up to drop materials. And if you were to observe at busy times, you would find that people leave their doors open, engines are running, these sorts of things, all of which would be eliminated if they simply had a drive-by drop-off. Likewise, circulation of traffic and pedestrian safety concerns. You don't have people walking from the parking lot into the library. You just have them driving by. So it's more advantageous from the standpoint of the pedestrian. And the design, the current design, is for 2 lanes of traffic. All this would do would be to change those 2 lanes. Currently, you have the right side closest to the library for cars to park and people to put their things in the hole in the wall. That would change to the left side, where they would simply drive up, put the materials in the box, and drive on. So there really is no difficulty. Finally, if you notice, that parking area is zoned yellow for the length of 1 car and zoned red for the remainder of the curbing in front of the library. At no time will you find, when there's a group of people trying to return, will you find people parking? They simply queue up in the red zone. And you may have 5 cars, 6 cars. I've observed that, and Vicki was with me at the time and observed that too. Finally, the cost to reconfigure the parking lot, I think, is a red herring. What I've just said would mean that you really don't have to reconfigure it. You simply wouldn't need the parking that you have now if people didn't have to park and come in or come to the hole in the wall. As regards the purchase and installation and maintenance of a box, it's de minimis. I mean, we don't have money to throw around, but this is really small potatoes. And it is conceivable that this may, the box, may be given as a community gift, provided that there is an opportunity for, I would say advertising, but it's not really advertising, something on the box saying this was a community gift, the same as the benches in the parks and things of that nature. Are there any questions of me?
Questions for John?
You know, John, I mean, we've known each other a long time, and we're neighbors up there on the hill. You know, the difficulty I have, and I'll be quite honest, I mean, obviously it's the first time I'm seeing it. I wasn't here in 2005. Neither was Vice Mayor Lewis. So this is the first, in effect, time we've seen it. You know, Ms. Johnson speaks in her letter about and I'm not on the library JPA, but one of us is. I'm not sure which one, maybe Councilwoman Doherty is.
Right. I am.
Oh, I'm sorry. Mayor David, excuse me. But they're talking about the JPA putting in this computerized system. And she speaks to the fact that if we did this, it would negate the possible plans of doing this on the countywide basis. And this troubles me because I'm thinking, well, if there's a better way to do it, apparently they're doing it in Belmont now. I have not seen except from the outside, their library. I'm not a librarian, okay? And I'm trying to understand when a professional sits here and says, we're trying to do this new system to eventually going to get to all the branches, but if you do this, then it may negate that. That's a difficulty. I'm having difficulty with myself figuring out the differences there. And I apologize for putting you on the spot. You're not a librarian either. We're just citizens. But, I mean, that's the difficulty I'm having with this.
Okay. First of all, the word may is very, very important. This is done by libraries all over the country. And library systems that are more technologically advanced than we currently are. They don't have the problem that she cites, and I think she's talking in a very general term. This may do something that creates a problem. As easily, it may not, and I believe that to be the case. Tell me the difference between somebody picking a book up out of a bin that's on the opposite side of a wall from a from a slot in the wall, and somebody picking it out of a cart that it's been brought into the library. In effect, there is none.
Right. No, I agree with that. Except for the distance and the rain. But regardless of that, the way they're explaining the system is that when they drop the book through the slot, it automatically returns the item through a computer, it's got a chip in there or something that automatically kicks in and they know it's back. And so if you put an outside box, and again, I apologize for, trying to split hairs here, but if you put an outside box, that negates the system they're trying to do here for the county. And that's what I'm conflicted with what they're trying to do. And if we do this, we're sort of going on the opposite side of what they're trying to accomplish with the library system. That's all.
I understand that, Bob.
Okay.
I guess it's a matter of, is the library a service organization? What would the people who use the library and the citizens like? My request is to find out what the citizens want, the library patrons want, and then follow that course. That should be your lead, not what I think is best, not what the library thinks is best, but what the people of San Carlos think is best.
Thanks, John.
Now, one more comment. I know that Brad, in his material prior to the election, made quite a point of saying that, my priorities or your priorities are my priorities, and I'm sure all of you feel exactly the same way. So let's find out what the priorities are for the citizens of San Carlos, and then make those your priorities. Thank you. Oh, any other questions?
Any other questions for John? Thank you, John.
Thank you, John.
Any other public members like to address us on this issue?
I think you have 2 speaker cards that we gave you.
Yeah. Other than them?
Oh, I'm sorry. Okay.
I think, Vicki, you're up, or Chet, whoever would like to go first.
Good evening. I'm Victoria Johnson, Director of Library Services for San Mateo County Library. I'm here.
I didn't mean to speak to you in the abstract. I apologize. I didn't realize you were here.
That's fine. I was sort of incognito at the time. I'm happy to address the issues just raised and to answer any questions. I do have one handout that I'd like to share, and I've got a couple of extra, not a lot, but certainly for Mr. Hoffman and the city manager. This is a view of some drive-up book drops in 3 of the communities near us. And it's not representative of all the uses, but it's representative of misuses that I happened to capture on my camera as I drove by those libraries coming to work one day. So this is just to demonstrate that regardless of how we intend for drive-up book drops to be used, the users themselves, make up their own minds how to do it. So the first image shows a car adjacent to the 2 book drops at Menlo Park, and you can see that this is a passenger side approach. You can see that if a passenger was in the car, it would be very difficult to reach out, open the door with one hand, and insert books in across that distance. The next picture is a car that drove up to those same book drops but drove in head first, and the person then got out and walked around to the book drops. The third picture shows 2 cars, one that came as though it was passenger side, the other approaching as though it was driver's side. Both of them stopped short of the book drops and got out to deposit the books. The next picture is at Redwood City Library, which is a drive-up book drop in a parking lot. And once again, the individual had to exit her car in order to deposit the books. And then finally is the picture at San Carlos, where the person is also exiting the car, but not different from these other libraries. Excuse me, my voice is shaky. I'm not usually quiet for 2.5 hours, so. Anyway, so that's just to illustrate one of the reasons that we oppose these book drops. In my past library experience, I've worked in libraries with book drops and often seen mishaps surrounding them. And certainly I think, were we talking about putting something like this in the parking lot, there would be safety concerns. And what I envision is that currently people park in the parking lot and must walk across the lanes of traffic to get into the building. if you have a car parked to use the book drop in the new location or the, proposed location, that car then screens the view of any cars passing it. And should children or other people be walking toward the library, they could very easily be in a dangerous situation. We're in an interesting partnership because the city is responsible for providing the facility in which the library is housed, and the county library system is responsible for managing the operations. And in terms of operations, we do think that this would be a wrong decision. We oppose this because we think that adding 2 more book drops, which we think would be required, would further dilute staff time in a way that would be disadvantageous. I'm wondering if I can get my water.
Sure.
Of all the 12 libraries in our system, San Carlos was the most, had the most foresight when this library was built, because that was done 10 years ago with book drops directly into the workroom. Now, many libraries and most of the other libraries in our system are attempting to do this same thing. So while you're looking at what I consider a backward movement, other libraries are trying to emulate what you've done. I kind of consider the freestanding book drops as the analog version of how to return materials to a library. I conducted a survey last week of libraries on the California Library Association listserv, and I received 22 responses. This the survey was really to assess best practices for the return of library materials. And we received responses from very small libraries up to very large libraries. And I tend to lump us in with the large systems that responded. They included San Jose, Santa Clara County, and Alameda County within our region, and other large libraries from further away. These are all, larger library systems tend to be employing technology much more than smaller systems. And contrary to what Mr. Hoffman said, we are one of the more technologically advanced libraries. Larger libraries employ more people and have to focus more on staff efficiencies. And so we're looking at employing technologies that actually free up staff time so they can serve the public. It depends on, I guess, your view of customer service depends on how you define that. Excuse me. I define customer service as having people, staff members available to directly serve the public, to help them with computer instruction, to provide them with programs, to answer reference questions, to help resolve problems. I don't consider it to be good customer service to keep staff members in the back room doing a lot of manual tasks, handling materials. And so like these other large libraries, we've employed, for example, self-check machines. Our goal is to have 95% of our checkout conducted on those machines. That's because as the use of our libraries grow, we're not adding new staff. Our staff has stayed very stable for the last, at least for the last 3 years. I think it grew by 2 people prior to that. And yet this year alone, our circulation is going up 35%. And just so you know, among the 47 library systems in the state that serve populations over 150,000, and we serve 275,000 people, we're the third highest in per capita circulation. And San Carlos Library does twice as much as we do system-wide. So in other words, system-wide, we circulate materials to our users 10 per capita. San Carlos circulates 21 items per capita for the city. In order to handle that, we need to employ more automated systems. And the system we're looking at, similar to Belmont's, would cost the library system close to $200,000. It would require that all materials are returned at one location, directly into the building, where I should have brought pictures of this, and I'm sorry I didn't. If you picture something similar to an ATM machine, you walk up, push a button, a door opens, and you insert an item. It gets scanned, resensitized, and then sorted into a bin. From that bin, items go directly onto book trucks and right out to the shelf. In San Jose, where they've been doing a study of this kind of system, they've figured out that materials reach the shelf 40% faster, or the time to shelf is reduced by 40%. Here are some of the reasons that the libraries using this kind of automation give for doing so. Reduced repetitive stress injuries for staff. Library aides have more time to shelve materials. Library assistants have more time to work directly with the public. The library is able to meet the rising demand without rising staff costs. And there's quicker return of materials to their original branch or for holds throughout the system, and less backlog of unshelved items. I think that basically covers the items that I wanted to mention, and I'd be happy to answer any questions.
I just have one question, Vicki. In terms of cost, do you have any idea what sort of cost we would incur by, at least operationally, by installing drop-off?
Well, I did look at some of the implementation costs a couple of years ago. I'm sure those have increased.
Yeah.
But in terms of ongoing operations, we have not costed that out. That would take some staff time, and frankly, it would take a year's experience. If we were to do this, the way the library system works with our other cities who request additional services or additional hours, or who request us to manage maintenance or something like that, is that we use whatever data we do have, and we don't have data on this right now, but we would then use educated analysis and a little bit of guesswork to determine what it would cost. We would then track what it costs for a year, and typically we invoice the city at the beginning of the year for the anticipated cost, and then we reconcile at the end of the year and would repay the city if we hadn't used all the money, or request additional payment if the service had cost more.
So I gather from your description of the new technology coming in, should this happen, someone would go out physically, take the books out of the bins, take them over to the inbox, push them through the window like the customer normally would, and they would be automatically sorted?
Well, I mean, that would be one approach, but frankly, we already have 2 book drops inside the library, 2 book drops right into the building, 20 feet from where we're proposing these additional drops. I think if if this is what the community prefers, that maybe then we would just need to stay with a manual system. And because I really could not justify spending $200,000 then to have staff go out, bring the book truck 20 feet, and feed things in manually. I don't think that makes operational sense.
Okay. Any questions for Vicki?
I have one. I have been on the tour of the San Mateo Library, and that has the automated system you're talking about, I believe, where the books are automatically scanned and sorted and go out on and get put on a cart or something like that, if I remember correctly.
Actually, they have a different system.
Oh, they do.
Their system is quite elaborate and quite a bit more complex than what we're talking about. We actually worked with a Scandinavian country, a vendor in a Scandinavian country who had developed sortation systems for Land's End and Amazon and companies like that. So it actually had an industrial application prior to selling to libraries. And it's a little simpler than what you saw at San Mateo, but the same concept.
And do they, in San Mateo, do they just have, what do they have for customers as far as dropping off materials?
Well, their system, of course, their building is brand new, so they were able to design this accordingly. And my understanding is one can either drive into the basement and return materials, or there is a drive-up drop box, and it goes onto a conveyor that goes down under the driveway and underneath the building and back up. And if a book gets stuck down underneath, staff have to climb down into the bowels of the building. So we're not planning anything that
elaborate.
Now, I can tell you in San Jose, where they're building lots of new libraries, one of their new buildings, the Cambrian branch, does have drive-up access directly into the workroom. And in the survey I conducted, that was the preferred method for just about every library director or circulation manager. Because, once again, it's satisfying customer need, but it's also lending to the efficiency of staff.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other?
Thank you.
Thank you, Vicki. Chet, would you like to speak to this?
Good evening. My name is Chet Malacca, manager of the San Carlos Library. Thank you, Mr. Mayor and council members. Related to this evening's discussion of library book drops, I would like to present each council member with copies of the San Mateo County Library System and San Carlos Library's annual report for 2006. In 2006, the San Carlos Library circulated 626,793 items, provided service for 331,357 visitors, and had over 13,000 citizens entertained and informed by our programming efforts. Our average monthly circulation is a circulation of 50,000 compares to libraries many times its size in much larger communities. The library has become successful as a destination hub of the community, and one that the citizens of San Carlos should be proud of for having had the foresight to plan, build, and open in 1999. It is also evident that our library is a destination when one takes the opportunity to observe how library patrons are now using our existing 4 book drops and audiovisual drops that we have. Some of our findings. Our library hosted an average of 920 daily visitors in March 2007. When the library is open, 3% of patrons coming to the library use our existing outdoor book drops, then return to their car and left, while 97% of patrons coming to the library use our existing book drops and then enter to use the library, often with young family members in tow. 50% of all patrons using our outdoor book returns when the library is closed were pedestrians and not drivers. The library has also become a destination for citizens living outside San Carlos. We recently spot-checked our returns and found that 25% of materials put through our book drops were returned by non-San Carlos residents. Library staff is very grateful to have the support of our citizens, City Council, City Administration, and employees, all of whom help make the San Carlos Library a successful destination and an asset to the community, and are continually interested in removing barriers for all citizens to be able to use and enjoy our library. Our patrons are very vocal. One request we receive time and time again that can help us achieve our barrier-free goal is for a pedestrian and wheelchair ramp that can provide access to the front of the library from either Elm or Cherry Street. This improvement, if implemented, would be beneficial to a significant portion of the community, more so than increasing our book returns from our already existing 4 to 6. In conclusion, I recognize that this is a City Council decision, and as library manager, ask the council members not to direct library staff to diminish service we provide by having us take our valuable time away from our duties on the library floor, serving the public by adding an operational task of having to empty remote book returns every 2 hours. Thank you for your time and consideration.
Thank you, Chet. I might make just to clarify what Chet mentioned in terms of the safe access into the library. It has been an issue for a while, and it is on our capital improvement program, so we should be able to accomplish that sometime this year. John?
Just very briefly, a couple of comments on what you received from Vicki. According to the shadows, this was taken quite early in the morning or late in the afternoon. Don't know when she goes to work, but it looks as if it may be late afternoon. The first picture on the front there, you see somebody pulling up to a book drop. That's on the passenger side. That's not what I would suggest. I would suggest that it be the driver's side for the greatest convenience. On the second page, both of those pictures, all I can say is there's no accounting for what some people do. They go the wrong way down one-way streets. They go the wrong way when they're directed to go buy a book drop. Some of them even park to then go to the book drop. And finally, the last photograph the last photograph there on page 3. You see that the lady is, now this is San Carlos Library, you see that the lady is returning her books, her door is open, and she is parked in the red zone. So, you know, I really don't know what to comment except to say that you can't account for everything people may do. Had there been a drive-by, obviously she wouldn't have her car door open, and she wouldn't be in the red zone. So I hope that automation does not trump what I believe the citizens of San Carlos and library patrons would like. And my request is don't put the cart before the horse. Find out what the citizens want, and then act upon that. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, John. And that is what John is asking us to do, is to somehow determine what the citizens want and respond appropriately. I think that, not prejudging what we would find if we did this, you need to consider several factors. There is, of course, a time and effort and cost involved in the survey, and that could be any amount you want it to be, but it would have to be professionally done, and it would have to be something that we would have to fund. Secondly, I think that if we did this project and if we did put out the boxes, we're obviously going to be responsible to pay for it. So that's money that is coming out of our budget, and we would have to agree to that. Thirdly, I would point out that we're doing quite well, despite the perhaps inconvenience of this drop-off system. As Chet mentioned, 97% of those who drop off come into the library. And it was interesting. I went to a meeting, the staff meeting for the library staff. They were on a retreat last week, and they had a keynote speaker, a futurist, who talked about libraries. And he made a strong point that the purpose of the library is to get people involved. It's to communicate. It's to interpret. It's to help. And people who have a true need to come to the library are going to get out, and they're going to either get more books or they're going to seek the help they need. So people are not finding it difficult to get into our building, except perhaps for the oldsters who need a more convenient ramping system. And those who come are certainly finding it convenient. 600,000 items a year pretty well speak to that. So that's kind of my initial shot at it. Who else would like to speak up?
I feel a little, I don't know, betwixt and between on this. I can see the simplicity of what Mr. Hoffman's asking for, which is some kind of poll. And I suppose you'd have to, in order to do that, you'd have to have some kind of artist rendering or something that would give an indication of what a drop box looks like in the location that it would be proposed for, which I would think would be the apex of the peninsula, the island there at the library. And then, explain to folks also, I think if you were to do a poll, you'd have to give them some idea of operational cost and what it would mean to staff and how often they'd have to go out there and so forth. So you'd have to, truly vet this completely and then give it to folks. I don't know what kind of threshold you would put on it, though, of, would it simply be, well, those who responded, if it's a supermajority or a majority of those who cared to respond, do you then move forward with it? Or, what kind of threshold do you set to say, well, we've gotten a message here, we should move forward with it? And that last item brings me to, I guess, where I sit with this, which is, with all due respect, we have Mr. Hoffman here speaking on this item. He has before. We voted on it at one time, apparently, and it was 2-2, and it sat. In the meantime, we haven't had any public outcry or people marching before us at the council meeting saying, how come you're not doing anything about that drop box that Mr. Hoffman brought up? So I just don't see that much political will in the overall community asking for this. I see one person. I don't know, John. I respect you and I respect what you're after here, but I'm just not sure that we should be spending that much time on it, quite frankly.
Well, Matt, there was a survey done, and out of 124 responses, 122 people said they liked it.
Mr. Hoffman, I understand that, but that survey is like going out and asking people if they like candy. That's what I'm saying. For us to do this properly, we would have to properly vet the issue, which is do an artist rendering, show what it looks like, talk about what it means to the library staff, what the cost to the city of San Carlos would be, because it would be an extra. It's not included in our JDA contract to run a book drop. So we'd have to look at all these things and then ask people what they thought of it. And I don't know. Where I come down to is if those 124 people were here tonight lining up to the dais and saying, look at this, please look at this, I'd have to consider it differently. But we're not seeing that kind of political will. So I'm ready this time to just let the thing go.
It's difficult. I was going to ask Ms. Johnson about San Mateo because I go by there a lot. And I know there's a little turnout on 3rd Avenue there for people to drop their books off. And I was going to ask her why this brand-new library had, and I know why they had a drop-off, even if it wasn't mechanized, which you've explained to me, because 3rd Avenue is very heavily traveled. I mean, it's just, and I thought, well, gee, they have to come out every day and get that. Well, you've explained to me they don't. They have this system, which I'm not sure some of the librarians are probably real excited about getting in the bowels of that thing, but anyway, to drop it off. I haven't been exposed to the JPA like some of my colleagues have been. There's 12 libraries here. You have two professional librarians coming up, one who is actually on site and one who is overseeing the other 12 libraries. It's hard for me to, and again, I've got ideas about certain things to come up with also about perhaps how we operate things, but when I go back to the professionals, they sometimes educate me to why perhaps this doesn't work or why it's more efficient to do it the other way. I have to, I think, agree with Councilmember Grocott that I have been around that parking lot at various times. It can get extremely crowded. There's no question that people park in the red zone. I agree with you 100% there, to get out of their car and put their books in. However, I've never seen, again, it's just a random time, I've been there in mornings, afternoons, and evenings, this huge backlog of cars that are lined up, and maybe if I stood there for hours, I would see that, or gone at certain hours, I would see that. I am concerned that if you put this in, you will actually have people stop at the book drop that's proposed, and you will have people who will be stopping at the curb to go the other way, because they don't either want to wait here, or this is just the way they've always done it, so they'll go, because I know we're not going to eliminate the ones in the front, so now we're going to have an additional one, and now you will have no room or possible more safety issues. So again, this is the first time I've seen this. It was presented apparently, as I said or I understand, to the council 2 years ago, but I honestly have to say that I have to come down on the fact that I just don't see the great demand and need for this item to be put in or even studied with staff time on a budget.
Brad.
I guess I share a lot of sentiments of fellow council members. And on top of that, I think we have Friends of Libraries, a very active volunteer organization. I think if there was a compelling need or a grassroots effort, I think we'd all listen to it. This seems like, given our budget situation, given where we are with everything, I'm just not seeing this as a driving need or perhaps even something that might derail a future system or something like that. I think there's other expenses than just the cost of the box. I think we have a pretty convenient system. I think it's working pretty well. And I'm not seeing this as a priority, frankly.
And I'll close the discussion by saying that I was enlightened by the meeting I attended at the staff retreat. I see libraries in a totally different way. I see libraries that are going to be more and more electronic, more and more virtual, more and more time being spent to help people find information through the virtual means rather than through the book means. Not to say the books are going to go away, but things will change. And as the younger generation comes up and become more and more library users, they're going to take electronics with them. And the challenge, I think, at the library is for the folks to respond to that. What does that have to do with a drive-up? Well, I think the drive-up will accommodate a few people, and they will appreciate it. But I don't think that the cost, the effort, the thought is worth that accommodation. And I think as we saw the success of the library, and as it moves forward into its next generation, we would be well advised to work with staff to make it work as well as possible and not to infringe or impede the direction libraries are going. So I would vote against the matter at this time. And if there are no other comments, there is a resolution that will help put this to bed. The first resolution we have is a consensus not to study freestanding library material Dropbox, and I presume that's the resolution of preference to the council.
Through the chair, I'd make the motion to approve resolution 2007-24 of the City Council of the City of San Carlos, reaffirming the May 23rd, 2005 City Council consensus. We need to fix the spelling there, but consensus to not study freestanding library material Dropbox at the San Carlos Library operated by the Library Joint Powers Authority.
Is there a second?
Second.
Roll call, please.
Councilmember Grisilli?
Yes.
Councilmember Grocott?
Yes.
Councilmember Lewis?
Yes.
Mayor Davids?
Yes. All right, that brings us to the end of our meeting. I think that is the last item, so let me just remind the audience and folks at home that our next meeting will be on the 26th of April, or 23rd of April, and this will be at the Hiller Air Museum, and we'll be dealing with the final reading of the EIR. The council will review the EIR document for Palo Alto Medical Foundation, so I invite everyone to come to that meeting or tune in. And with that, the meeting is adjourned. Thank you.